I used to live in one of those shared buildings, one that has multiple bedrooms and bathrooms, but a shared living area. At the time of this incident, I lived there with 3 other people, a mother and her grown son who shared one part of the living area, and the typical middle-aged, grizzled veteran who had the other one. Most of the time, we didn't interact. I and the mom had jobs at separate ends of town, and the kid apparently helped people move and do chores for cash. The old veteran guy stayed home a lot and ate baked beans. Now, let me get this straight when I say this guy loved baked beans. He had them for every meal. Usually a can of Bush's with some other thing, usually a bit of whatever the mom made, though if the mom and son went out, this guy would have an entire pot of baked beans. I'm sure he had horrible gas, but I never managed to smell it, which was fine by me. He bought the beans on his own pay, so nobody ever complained about it either. At this time, I was a huge fan of MMORPGs, so I would often stay up all odd hours of the night playing them. This particular night, I was talking to some of my online buddies. I don't remember the circumstances around it, but I do remember talking to them about scary stories. As we were telling them, I began hearing creaks and groans in the house. No big deal. This was an old house. It still creeped me out though, and I kept telling my mates to knock it off. They did eventually, but soon after I heard the call of nature. To get to the bathroom allotted to me, I would have to go down the hallway, through the shared area, to the other hallway and the bathroom. Normally no problem, but it was dark and scary out there. Yeah, I know, I'm a wuss. Eventually, I worked up the courage to avoid pissing my pants and go. I opened the door and left it open so I could use the glow of my computer as light. I walked down the hallway as fast as I could go without going into a full-out run, and made my way through the shared space into the bathroom without consequence. I did my duty, then flushed the toilet. When it was done, I realized the house seemed eerily quiet compared to before my trip. Still, I washed my hands and made my way back out. This time, I was slightly more relaxed as I was walking, though it didn't last long, as I almost shrieked when my foot landed in something wet and sticky as I walked through the shared area. I stopped myself from screaming when I realized that it was probably just a spilled can of baked beans that the veteran guy had left open on the counter. I'd probably knocked it over while running to the bathroom. Without even thinking, I grabbed a couple paper towels and mopped up as much of the mess as I could see from the glow of my computer. When that was done, I went back to my room. As soon as I sat down, I noticed the game had logged me out, which was weird since I was sure I hadn't taken that long. I logged back in to find myself greeted by at least 1,000 frantic whispers, asking me if I was alright, what had happened, etc. I wasn't sure what they were talking about until somebody sent me a log of my whispers to various mates. All of them detailed gruesome, vicious murders, suicides, and other nasty, horrible things. Some that still make me shudder when I consider that some human mind must have come up with them. All of these whispers were sent while I was in the bathroom. I couldn't find any explanation for them, seeing as I knew everybody else was in bed. It took 2 hours for my mates to finally calm me down. I didn't think I could get to sleep, but I guess my body eventually drifted off from exhaustion. I woke up the next morning to policemen banging on my door. Apparently, during the night, somebody had broken into the house through a window accidentally left open and taken an axe to the mother and her son. They had then dragged the 2 corpses to the window and left. I was horrified to see the bloody paper towels in the trash can, and then went into nervous panic attacks when a crime scene analyst began detailing how the murders could have happened. I don't remember his entire speech in detail, but I do remember one part, which he told to me directly. Here, this is where you mopped up the blood. But this spot here, see this stain? This indicates that he kept the bodies here for a good while, almost as if he stood here for a long moment, watching something.
Our next tale is entitled, The Neighbors Upstairs. When noisy neighbors keep disturbing you, sometimes it's what you find out about them that's the most disturbing of all. This tale was written by Jennifer Mauser and is read by Wendy Corrigan.
My husband and I moved into our new apartment back in February, when I was about 7 months pregnant. We love this complex. The staff is always friendly and helpful. We've never had any issues with any of our neighbors, except for a crazy old lady that lived under us for about 4 months and complained about us making loud banging noises at all hours of the night, when we had long since gone to bed. She sent the cops to our apartment in the wee hours of the morning several times. And the apartments themselves are very nice. Spacious, high ceilings, brand new appliances, etc. For the last 6 weeks or so, however, we've been dealing with some very noisy, inconsiderate upstairs neighbors. I assume they have a few young children because we hear them running through the apartment constantly. Stomp, 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 stomp to one wall. Stomp, 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 stomp back to the other. Things falling over. What sounds like someone jumping up and down, up and down, up and down. We've tried our best to ignore it, but it's getting to the point where it's waking us and our daughter up in the middle of the night. Having a child under a year old is hard enough without asshole neighbors upstairs being noisy and waking us all up every 2 hours. About a week ago, I'd decided enough was enough. I went upstairs and knocked on the door, but there was no answer. From the way the apartments are set up, if you walk through the front door, you'll pass the kitchen and end up in the living room in front of a door leading to the balcony. So if the blinds are open, you can see the light coming through the peephole outside the apartment. I stood for a moment, watching the peephole, and after there was no answer, I knocked again. I'd heard them banging around upstairs. I knew they were home and was getting upset that they were ignoring me. Suddenly, the light in the peephole started to go out. It started getting dark from one side, as if someone was leaning over to look through. I said, "Hello," and waved at the peephole, and then waited for the door to open. But it never did. I knocked again lightly and said, "Hi, I'm your downstairs neighbor. Can I talk to you for a moment?" And leaned in slightly to listen for a response. But it was completely silent. What must have been no more than a minute, but felt like 5, passed, and I said, "Thanks a lot," and walked back downstairs. When I got to my apartment, I wrote out a note. "Dear neighbors, I am writing this note to you asking if you would please try and keep the noise to a minimum. I understand that there is a certain amount of noise to be expected when living in an apartment, but recently it has gotten out of control. The persistent banging noises and running through the apartment wakes my baby in the middle of the night. I wanted to meet with you in person, but I guess you are out. Please understand I am not trying to be rude. Feel free to come by my apartment anytime if you would like to speak to me. Sincerely, your neighbors downstairs." Running back upstairs, I stuck the note on the door. The peephole was still dark. Fast forward to this morning. The noise has continued off and on for the last week. I'd gone upstairs a few times since I left the note, in hopes that I would catch someone home that would actually open the door, but still hadn't been able to talk to anybody. The note was gone, but apparently they didn't read it, because they were still banging away like always. This morning my husband and I were sitting at the table drinking coffee when there was a huge bang upstairs from the living room area that sent my daughter into a fit. I completely lost it. They woke us up 3 times last night making noise. I grabbed a broom and banged on the ceiling. I'm still surprised I didn't damage it, until my arm got tired, all the while screaming obscenities at the ceiling. When I finally calmed down, I called the office. I explained the situation to a woman that picked up, and she told me she'd speak with the manager and get back to me ASAP. My husband left for work, and about 20 minutes later, I got a call back from the office. This time the manager was on the line, who I've gotten to know pretty well since we moved in.
Hi, Jenny, how are you? Brittany told me about the noises you guys have been dealing with. You're in apartment 128, right?
Yeah, they're driving us nuts. I left a note the other...
Well, Jenny, nobody lives in that apartment. The last tenant was a single man, and he moved out about 2 months ago.
Are you sure?
Yes.
But that doesn't... Are you sure?
If you like, we can send someone out to check the apartment in a few minutes. But yes, it's been vacant since Mr. Rupert moved out.
About half an hour later, I was standing at the front door of the apartment with one of the other office assistants. The light in the apartment glowed through the peephole. She slid the key into the lock and pushed the door open to the empty apartment. The new carpet showed no signs of someone even walking through it. We stepped inside and looked around, but there was no sign that anyone had been in the apartment recently, except for a pile of shredded paper in the corner of the living room. She walked up to it and began collecting the pieces, and I immediately recognized the writing on the pieces scattered on the floor. It was the note I had left a week ago. Maybe the old lady living under us wasn't crazy after all.
Our next tale is entitled Grandma and Grandpa. A son discovers a family secret about his deceased grandparents and the unsettling events in their old house. This tale was written by Alexander White and is read by David Cummings. The last few holidays, I had noticed a bit of friction between my dad and my uncle. I didn't think much about it at first. I mean, they are brothers after all, and brothers get into it sometimes. My uncle, though, he was not getting over whatever it was that had been bugging him. I mean, this went on for like 4 years. So, last year, on the day after Christmas, I asked my dad, "What's up with Uncle Ken? He seems really combative lately."
"Well, he's just mad that your mom and I sold your grandma's house after she passed away instead of living in it."
"Oh yeah. Why did you guys end up selling that house?" I asked. My dad seemed to get a bit flustered and he said,
"Well, you know, it was just a really old house that needed a bunch of work and we didn't really feel like restoring it."
And I left it at that. A while later, I was talking to my mom about something. I don't really remember what, but she said, "You know, we didn't sell your grandma's house because it was too old." "Oh?" I asked. "Now, I didn't tell the other kids about this, but do you remember after your grandma passed away, your dad and I went to go clean up her place?" "Sure." "Well, the first day we went there, we met up with your Uncle Ken, Sharon, Jeff, Greg, and Aaron. Your dad and I got there a few hours earlier and started cleaning out the garage and most of the basement. We ended up working straight until almost 10 o'clock at night, and by that time we were too tired to drive home from Berwyn, so we just decided to stay the night." "Did Ken and Sharon stay the night too?" "No, they left a few hours before then." "That sounds about right." "So your dad and I went to go sleep in his mom's old room." "Really? That's kinda creepy." "I guess he thought it might help him feel closer to his mom. You know, after his dad passed away, it was really hard for him to watch her grieving so much. I always thought that she died so soon afterwards because she just missed him so much." "Yeah, I could definitely see that." "So your dad wakes up in the middle of the night because he thought he heard something downstairs." "Like what?" "Well, he wasn't sure at first, but he thought he heard someone calling his name." "Are you serious?" "Absolutely. He turned the light on and looked at the door and heard it again. It sounded like his mom calling his name. So he went out into the hallway and sure enough, he could hear his mom saying, 'Phil, Phil.' And he says that it didn't sound like distant or ghosty or anything like that. He said it sounded like she was just talking to him. So he went out into the hallway and turned the corner, and at the end of the stairs, he saw her and your grandpa standing there. He said that they didn't look half transparent and they weren't glowing or anything like that. They just looked solid, like you or me. He did say that your grandpa looked very, very tired. And your grandma, well, she didn't look bad. She just looked heavy, you know? like she was sad. Are you kidding me? Not at all. In fact, the next day, after your dad left, I found this, she said, pulling out an old diary from under the table. Wait, so you guys stayed the night? After your dad saw that, he rushed back into the bedroom and locked the door, which, by the way, had 3 locks on it. One in the knob, 1 deadbolt, and 1 chain. We didn't know why at first, but the knob and the chain had been broken off, like the door had been kicked down. He left the light on all night and left first thing in the morning. You stayed behind? He didn't tell me what had happened until much later. I figured he was just too emotional to be there so soon. So he left you in the house with the ghosts? Well, he figured I would probably just call him crazy. You know your dad. Do you think he believes in ghosts? No, of course not. Right. So, like I was saying, I found this diary that your grandma started keeping after your grandpa died. Oh, I didn't know she had been keeping one. Oh, me neither. It starts off pretty normal. She does write about how sad and lonely she was after Grandpa Jim died. She really only talks about him for the first few pages. Then after that, it's mostly really in-depth stories about her going out and talking to her girlfriends and shopping and all that. For the first few weeks, she wrote every day. Then it was every other day. And then it started getting really sad. Like here. She opened up the diary to a page that had been dog-eared. The only thing it said was, "Spent some time in the garden today. I miss Jim." The handwriting was pretty sloppy, but I didn't really think much of it. My grandma never had very steady hands, and I knew her arthritis was getting pretty bad near the end. Adam, you know the garden was the only place your grandma never went, right? My mom said. Really? I replied. That's where your grandpa had his heart attack. She never went out there. Here, keep reading. The next entry was dated a week and a half later. It said, "Feelin' lonely." My mom looked at me, and she had the most dead serious look on her face. If you knew my mom, you'd know that she's the type who always has something witty to say, always cracking jokes, and even when she's serious, she's never that serious. But the look she was giving me at that moment, at least to me, was downright unnerving. From here, it gets pretty morbid. And that's all she said. The next entry was a little over 2 weeks from the last one. It read, "Last night I was woken up in the middle of the night. I thought I heard something downstairs. I turned the light on and put my hearing aid in and listened for a minute. I heard something again. It sounded like maybe the TV was on downstairs, but I hadn't been watching TV. I put my robe on and opened the bedroom door. I could hear it more clearly. It sounded like James. He kept saying, 'Eleanor, Eleanor.' But it was quiet, not like he was moaning or yelling or anything. I went to the stairs, and I saw him at the bottom of the stairs looking up at me. It wasn't a ghost, it was him, and he looked real sad, tired and sad. He looked at me and said, 'Eleanor,' and I turned and ran into the bedroom and locked the door. I know I'm not crazy. I know what I saw." The next entry was from the next day. I had a man come by and put extra locks on the bedroom door. There is the lock in the door now, a deadbolt, and a chain. He looked at me like I was crazy, but I know I'm not crazy. Last night when I went to bed, I locked all 3 locks, left the TV in the bedroom on, and the lights. I thought I heard James again, but it might have just been the TV or the wind or something. The next entry, dated 2 days later. For the last few nights, I've been sleeping with the TV and the lights on. I haven't been woken up by James again. The next entry, dated the next night. I went to go have lunch with Florence today. I wanted to tell her about James, but I didn't dare. There isn't no way she'd believe me. She was telling me about a cruise her and Ruth were going to take in the fall up to Alaska to see the glaciers. I think I should go. It would do me good to get out of the house for a while. We had to end lunch early because storm clouds were coming in, and she doesn't like to drive in the rain. The next entry, dated later that night, 2:30 a.m. The power went out. I heard James calling me from outside the door. I unlocked the doorknob and the deadbolt, and I cracked it open to look out into the hallway. I saw him on the floor. He was on his belly, pulling himself around the corner towards my room. He looked just awful, just awful, just awful, just awful. His face was falling apart, and his hands were just skin and bones, and his eyes. He was growling at me. He's coming to get me. There was only one more entry, I think. It covered over the next 5 or 6 pages, and it just said, "He's coming to get me," over and over again. It might have been written the same night. It is completely impossible to tell.
"So,"
my mom said,
"we never really told you what happened with your grandma."
I looked at her, but I didn't say anything.
"Your Aunt Marie went by her place about a week after that. She knocked on the door, but no one answered. She used her key to get inside, and she saw that all the lights were on, even though it was the middle of the day. She went upstairs and heard the TV coming from inside her room. She knocked and knocked, but there was no answer. Marie called the police and told them what was going on, and they came out with the fire department and some EMTs. They were able to break the door down. Apparently your grandma had just locked the doorknob and the chain. They found your grandma in the far corner, curled up underneath a blanket. They said she'd been there about 6 days and had died of dehydration. After we found out what had happened, your dad didn't want anything to do with the house. So we put it on the market and got rid of it as fast as we could. We didn't want to tell Ken what had happened. I'm sure you can understand why."
Our next tale is entitled, "It's Locked." A single woman living alone endures a disturbing ordeal due to a door that just won't stay locked. This tale was written by Avery Nelson and is read by Corinne Sanders.
About 10 years ago, I was recently divorced and living alone in a 1-bedroom apartment. The place was clean and the rent was decent. One of those places that had a doorman. I felt safe here. I was alone and loving it, focused on my career and not on my clingy ex-husband. Things were finally looking up for me. At the time, I was working pretty late at the office and would often stumble into my apartment sleep-deprived in the early hours of the morning and wake up by 6:30, 7-ish to start the day. I started noticing that in the morning my door would be unlocked sometimes. I usually dismissed this as my sleep-dead brain, thinking that the bed looked more appealing than locking the door. Another thing that I noticed since moving in was that I seemed to misplace things more than I used to. Little things, like a hairbrush or nail polish, that sort of thing. It wasn't really that big of a deal, just enough to be a slight annoyance in my day. The longer I lived there, the more frequently I seemed to forget to lock the door. At first it was every once in a while, then it seemed like an almost daily occurrence. More things went missing. Things like pictures, shaving razors, and most disturbingly, my underwear. This went on for long enough that I started to get a little paranoid. I started to take the time at night to make sure the door was locked. I got into a habit of every night after I locked the door to turn the handle 3 times and say to myself, "It's locked, it's locked, it's locked." Time after time, I would wake up and the door would be unlocked. One time, I even tried staying up all night to watch the door, but I ended up falling asleep in my chair. I decided that my mind was not reliable enough to stay up all night, so I invested in a video camera. I went all out and bought the fanciest camera that I could get my hands on. So one night, I set the camera up facing the door. I hid the camera under a pile of towels on the floor. I locked the door and went to bed. When I woke up, my apartment looked normal. Nothing missing that I could see. I decided to check the tape. I fast-forwarded through hours of footage, not seeing anything. I was just about to give up when I noticed the handle of the door jitter. Then it slowly crept open. A figure slid through the half-open door and walked towards the camera. It paused, looked around as if it was listening for something, then walked forward into direct view of the camera. I paused the camera. The hairs on my arms and the back of my neck started to rise. I was staring directly into the face of the maintenance man of the building. I could see those big, thick glasses and curly hair. I had no doubt who it was. I played the tape a little more. He looked comfortable as he walked around the apartment. Then he turned and walked towards my bedroom and out of the view of the camera. I didn't know what to do. Sobbing, I called the police. I tried to explain over the phone, but couldn't. Soon enough, 2 officers arrived at my doorstep. I told them everything and showed them the tape. I remember seeing the blood drain from their faces. They promised me that I was safe and that they were going to get this guy. I needed to lay down, but didn't want to be alone. One of the officers offered to stand outside my apartment door as I took a nap. As I was laying in bed, unable to sleep, but too drained to move, something kept nagging at me. I laid there for a few minutes, tossing and turning, unable to get comfortable or rest. My mind was racing. Then a realization slowly washed over me and chilled me to the bone. We watched the tape and saw the man enter my home, but we never saw him leave. I froze, then started shaking. I needed to get to the front door. I sat up and looked around the room. I couldn't see anyone. I swung my legs over the side of the bed cautiously. My feet hit the cold wood floor, and I felt warm breath on my ankles. I raced out of my apartment as fast as I could and to the safety of the police officer. He called for backup. They found the man under my bed, clutching a knife and a Polaroid camera. To this day, I cannot sleep alone.
Our final tale is entitled The Tunnel. A family outing to do some fishing is interrupted while driving through a dark and menacing tunnel. This tale was written by Joey Murray and is read by David Cummings. I was all of about 5 years old. My mother, who was pregnant with my little sister, was in the car with me and my dad as we were out on a fishing trip at a nearby river in Montana. The road to this area often fell into states of ridiculous disrepair. In certain areas, you had to drive extremely carefully if the vehicle you were driving in didn't have four-wheel drive. This particular event happened in mid-June. The surrounding area was serene, but somewhat creepy at times. Being fairly high up in the mountains, it was not uncommon for the weather to still be pretty cool and wet. That day was no exception. One side of the road was a steep decline that went to the river. The other side was an even steeper incline that went up into thick trees, and on that particular day, thick fog. We had been fishing for a while with little success. I know this because if my father was in a good spot, you couldn't move him for all the money in the world. So the fact that we got back into the car from our initial fishing spot and proceeded to drive down the road indicated that my dad was not pleased with his luck at that particular bend of brook. The three of us were in an old Chevy coupe, my parents up front and me by my lonesome in the middle of the back seat. My father got to talking, as he would do, and probably drove a little further than he had intended. He slowly came to a stop when he realized we had come to a point in the road that went into what used to be an old railroad tunnel. The tunnel wasn't that long, maybe half a mile at the most, but it got dark very fast if you went into it. Regardless of its short stretch, the light on the far side felt like the exit to the tunnel was miles away. My dad spoke up.
You know, they say these tunnels are haunted by people who killed themselves on the train tracks.
Stop it! You're gonna scare him!
Well, I'm just letting him know in case we go through and something happens.
My father turned around to face me and looked at me wide-eyed. If I was older, I would have thought it humorous. At 5 years old, it was terrifying. Even before my father's grandstanding, I didn't want to go in there. Something about the very sight of the tunnel unnerved me. Had there been a back door to the car, I would have considered bailing out as my father drove closer. The car crept along at what felt like a turtle-like crawl. It took no time at all for darkness to completely envelop everything. Within seconds, it was so dark inside of the car that I couldn't even clearly see my parents, who were a foot away from me. Suddenly, it became slightly more luminescent as my father popped the round lever that turned on the headlights. There were various bits of debris and rock that had to be navigated around inside of the tunnel. Little bits of barb and concrete that had fallen to the dirt many years before we had decided to traverse this eerie passage. The car came to a sudden halt. Within a second, the lights had been turned off and the engine died.
Mom?
Oh, no!
Stop it! You're scaring him! Knock it off!
My father let out a slight chuckle, though my mother and I were far from amused. The laughter quickly ceased from my dad when he turned the key to the old Chevy only to hear a click sound in response.
Now, what the hell?
Stop messing around! Turn the car back on!
I'm not messing.
Suddenly, the whole car felt as though it hopped into the air, like we had hit a small ramp while moving at a considerable speed. Except, no such thing happened. We were completely still.
What the hell was that?
What are you doing?
Dear, I didn't do that. How would I?
3 huge bumps. It was as if a large, invisible hand was violently rocking the car. My father was now cursing up a storm and frantically turning the key. The car wouldn't respond at all. The car was now rocking without pause. My mother became hysterical. Terrified, I covered my eyes. Then came the screams. At first, I thought it was the frantic cries of my mother, but within seconds I realized that there were 2 sets of screams. My mom's and a much more ear-piercing and sinister scream that sounded as if it was right behind me.
At this age, I had never known what it was like to hear someone scream as if they were dying or about to die. But I knew even at that young age that the screams I heard behind me must have been what they sounded like. And the clawing. They were frantic clawing sounds, like an animal was trapped in a metal box and trying desperately to escape. I felt my mother's arms wrap around me. As much of a moment of release as that was, I could still hear the screaming and clawing. I was still so terrified, I didn't dare open my eyes. My mother's grip began to feel tight. She must have been as scared as I was. Gradually, the embrace tightened to where I started to have trouble breathing. I went to open my mouth to say something, but my mom's hand covered it before I could even breathe a word. Her hand felt ice cold and was trembling. She had to have obviously been so scared that she didn't realize what she was doing. Suddenly, she let me go. I still had my eyes closed until I heard the most relieving of sounds. The old Chevy roared to life. I opened my eyes. The headlights were now on. Both parents were dead silent, as the only sound now was the growl of the old V6, getting us out of that darkened hell. The screaming and rocking had also stopped. My father didn't ease up on the gas at all, even as we exited to the other side of the tunnel. Remember, this was a mountain road that was very poorly maintained. Driving quickly, one risked actually causing real damage to a vehicle, or, even worse, losing control and veering off the road and into the river. My father couldn't have cared less. About 100 yards away from the tunnel, my father gradually came to a stop and pulled off on the side of the road. The three of us were completely silent. Dad slowly opened the door and got out of the car. He walked around to the trunk and opened it. Now, from my perspective, I obviously couldn't see much. Through a small window of space between the trunk lid and the rest of the car, I could see a little bit of my father, and I could tell he wasn't moving. My mother became impatient.
What is he doing? Mom?
My voice was incredibly weak.
Yes, dear? You were squeezing me too tight. I couldn't breathe.
When?
Back there.
My mom's face went ghost white.
Honey, I haven't touched you.
After a short while, my father slammed the trunk shut and hurried back into the car.
We're done fishing. We're going home now.
My mother asked.
What?
Dad just cut her off immediately with a sharp shaking of his head, followed by his eyes flashing back towards me in the back seat. Whatever it was that he saw, he didn't want to discuss it with me present. We finally got back to the house, and my father told Mom to take me upstairs before he unloaded the gear from the trunk. Mom took me by the hand, led me up into the house, and told me to stay in my room and not to come out until they were done bringing the rest of the fishing stuff into the house. Dad and Mom got done bringing everything in. Mom started dinner, and everyone kind of settled back into a more normal routine. I, of course, was still dreadfully curious as to what was in the trunk that I wasn't allowed to see. My father had fallen asleep on the couch, and my mom was preoccupied with her cooking. Even at that age, I knew where they hung the spare keys and which key went to what. I grabbed the key for the old Chevy and went out the front door to tell my mom I was going to play in the yard while I waited for dinner to be ready. I pretended to play a little bit with some sticks in the yard just so I wouldn't get busted by running straight out to the car. Once I had made a couple of glances at the window to make sure I wasn't being watched, I snuck around the yard hedges to where the car was parked. The anticipation was one of excitement, not one of fear. I slid the key into the lock and popped the trunk. My excitement quickly turned into a sensation of pure horror. I was barely able to breathe seeing what it was that I saw. The entire interior of the trunk's upholstery was shredded, as if a wild animal with claws was locked inside of it. There were dark red crusted stains splattered all over the tatters of cloth. And the smell. Oh God, the smell. I was too young to know what I was smelling, but my older self now knows what it was that offended my senses. It was the smell of death. It smelled like dead, rotting flesh, and not from fish. I closed the trunk quietly and snuck back into the house. I never told my parents that I went out and looked at the inside of the trunk. They ended up getting rid of the car a few months later. They practically gave it away for the price that they sold it for. I can't say I blame them. Every fishing trip in that area then after, once we got to the tunnel, we'd turn around and head back the other way. That was always the sign that we had fished all of the river that we had cared to that day. I've revisited that area many times as an adult, and I still can't bring myself to go back in there. Just the sight of the tunnel sends chills down my spine.
Summers in Los Angeles were notoriously hot. It's the desert, you know. People don't realize that behind the glitz and glamour of the Hollywood elite, there's just bone-dry sand and dust settling under the paved roads and suburban parks. People think that LA is a superficial city, with no depth behind its artificial glimmer, but the truth is so much worse. I know this now, in part because of the events I'm about to unfold to you all. The year was 1989. The month was June. I was 7 years old and fresh out of school, ready to take on 3 months of uninterrupted decadence and bliss. In those days, the streets were still considered safe, and us kids would take to them by storm, assaulting the parks and parking lots with unprecedented vigor. We'd start the day right, playing baseball or foursquare with boundless energy, and then idle down to lazy games of horse or hide and seek as the sun bobbed its head and dipped beneath the Pacific. Of course, we always took a break when the ice cream man came by. The ice cream man. Oh, I can still remember his jingle. That sweet crescendo of notes sliding upon our delighted ears, and the subsequent scramble to his dinky white truck for chocolate eclairs and Mickey Mouse bars. As kids, we barely paid attention to the man himself, so fixated we were on the sugary treats, but I recall he was an older gentleman, always quick to flash us a smile, though not overly friendly either. It didn't matter. Inhaling gobs of gooey treats was all we ever cared about when he came by. Every day at 1 p.m., as reliable as a clock tower, the ice cream man would turn lazily down our neighborhood and herald that, yes, today was another hot, sticky, glorious summer day. Our band of miscreants fluctuated day by day, though there were a few constants. Jenny, our leader, big for a girl her age, and therefore by default a giant in our midst. She was a bully, but she looked out for all of us in her own weird way. Artie, the Jewish kid. His dad worked for someone who worked for someone important, and he liked to tell us that in his snot-nosed, uppity voice. Laika, who I secretly thought wasn't so bad for a girl. Mike, John, a couple of others. Me, I was the chubby one, the one whom the others liked to rag on. Ever since I could remember, I was softer than the others, rounder somehow. I didn't think that was fair, seeing as I wasn't really that different from the others, but you can understand my reticence whenever the ice cream man came by. After all, what 7-year-old wouldn't laugh at the little fat kid pumping his sausage legs towards his daily dose of sugar? When I think about it now, I can't help but wonder what would have happened if I was born a little thinner, or perhaps had a little thicker skin. If I didn't always hang back, waiting until the others had collected their treats before ashamedly stepping up and pushing $1 into the old man's hand. But of course, ruminating on such matters is useless. I can only relate what happened. On a particularly hot day that June, I was walking home from the playground with Leica and John. We were chatting about something or other, alternating between distractedly switching topics and running around, as kids are apt to do. We were turning the corner when we saw it, the ice cream truck, parked in the shadow of a copse of palm trees. We skidded to a halt like three little pigs, jaws agape. Immediately, Leica shrieked, "Ice cream!" and took off for the truck. John and I hung back, both puzzled. The ice cream man usually came to us. It was strange to come across his truck like this. We watched Leica as she approached, stalking the truck like a puppy after a dragonfly. She peered up and got a disgruntled look on her face. Turning back, she shook her head. "Nah, no one's there," she called. We shrugged and resumed walking, immediately losing interest. Leica skipped ahead while John and I argued over the logistics of a battle between Optimus Prime and Shredder. We had nearly completed the block when Leica glanced back and waved. It wasn't at us. The ice cream truck had come to life. It inched forward slowly, impeccably down the street towards us. Leica made to run back, but something in me made me stick my hand out at her. I shook my head silently. "What?" Leica pouted. "Listen." We did. Like a heavy miasma, the air hung thick and absent of the jingle. "He's probably not open," I said. Leica shrugged in acquiesce and we resumed walking. The truck's low rumble creeped up behind us. Maybe we all sensed it, but none of us felt like talking. It was like something descended down the three of us, smothering our carefree play. We walked in uncharacteristic silence, ears straining to hear the truck. Its motor was rapidly growing loudly, a rumbling beast stalking its prey. I dared not look back, but instead quickened my pace. Leica and John didn't protest, but followed suit. The truck approached, steadfast and implacable. There were no chimes. Where were the chimes? I finally looked back. The truck was idling again in front of another house. This time I looked carefully at its exterior. The scratched white paint, the colorful images of creamsicles and sundaes adorning the surface. I could see pits in the pictures, where the plastered-on images eroded away. It wasn't the usual truck, the one the old man drove. This one had an eye on it, carved sloppily into the steel. The eye was wide and bare, and there was a black hole right where the pupil should be. Inside that hole, there was only darkness. I tried to peer inside through another means, but the windows were tinted black. Were they always that dark? I craned my neck, trying to see who the driver was. Then the truck roared to life. The three of us startled and jumped back as it whizzed by us, tearing down the street at a frightening speed. I know what I saw then, though the other two denied it. But the side window wasn't tinted, and the driver inside wasn't that friendly old man. He looked heavyset and dressed in a colorful motley. I wiped my eyes from the exhaust and looked at my friends. The three of us stared at each other for a moment, and then dissolved into hysterics. The moment had passed, whatever it was, and we could resume our journey home safely. Evening came all too quick, and our games took on a frantic pace as we tried to squeeze every last drop of that summer glow from the day. Leica, John, and a whole bunch of us were gathered at the park by Leica's house, where the parents could keep an eye on us. We could see them in the distance, stalwart figures keeping keen eyes on their progeny. To us, though, they were the timekeepers, all too ready and eager to set into motion and drag us from our idyllic bliss. The day's offense had long since passed from my mind, and we were engaged in a deadly game of dodgeball. I hooked the ball to Leica, and then laughed as it bounced from her hands. "Butterfingers!" I crowed, thankful that it wasn't me this time who messed up the game. But Leica didn't care. Her eyes were only for the ice cream truck that had suddenly appeared in the distance. "Look!" she pointed. Heads whipped around in a frenzy. "Ice cream!" one boy shouted. "He came! He came!" shrieked a girl, oblivious to the fact that, yes, the ice cream man always came. But usually he came earlier, when the sun reached its zenith and customers were piling up. He never came this hour, when the light hit the trees at that angle where the world burned. We didn't care. We knew what the truck meant. As usual, I hung back and watched my thinner, faster peers flock the truck. I could see parents moving forward too, as oblivious to this anomaly as the rest of us. I slowly walked up to the truck, then froze in my tracks. It was the same truck as before. That eye peered out in the midst of the plastered images, and this time I could see that there was a second eye next to it. How did I miss it before? And those images below, those weren't pictures of ice cream. What I thought were chocolate bars were holes. The vanilla cakes were the color of bone and adorned a broken smile, which was lapped with rich ruby red. Nestled in the midst of the colorful treats was a horror to look at. A wide, grinning skull with bleeding lips turned up in a rictus. Nobody could see it but me. The children paid and were hastily unwrapping their bars. Looking back, I think I knew even then what was about to happen. In my imagination, I surged forward, slapped hands away from the ice cream, screamed loud and long. But instead, I just waited and watched. The first girl bit into her bar. She chewed with bliss, and then her eyes popped wide. I watched her little body go stiff and her breathing increase. I watched her chest rise and fall, spasming as she doubled over, choking. By then the others were choking too. Each fed their own special poison, handpicked by the ice cream man. It didn't take long. By the time the last one started choking, the first girl was frothing on the ground, feebly batting away the bubbles from her mouth. Parents were screaming, rushing by me. One knocked me to the ground and I felt my head hit the grass. I closed my eyes, wondering if this is what my friends were feeling. There was a roar of the engine, and then more screaming. I propped myself up, ignoring the writhing figures about, and watched the ice cream truck drive away. In the end, 11 children died that day. I was supposed to be number 12, but I was chubby for my age, reluctant to join my friends in their frenzy, always hanging back and always watching. They never caught the guy, you know. Some of you might wonder who he was, or why he did what he did. Really doesn't matter to me. As he was back then, he remains an irreconcilable force, something that should not have been there on that summer day. Yet he was so very much there. You might think there's no depth to this city, but you are wrong. It's only that beneath the surface of it all, there is but howling, black, purposeless madness. 21 years later, my life remains defined by that day. The media loves me. So do the psychologists. I let them drink their fill. I smile and nod and tell them, sure, maybe someday I'll write a book. Though, first, I thought to share my story with all you good people. Life seems dull somehow, fogged by a gray I cannot shake. My mom tells me I should meet a nice woman, but all I can remember is that little girl's spasming body. Was it Laika who I had watched in her final moments, or someone else? I really can't recall any of their faces now, and that's the saddest part. Laika, John, Jenny, everyone. I'm sorry I couldn't take the plunge with you all. I'm sorry I was so scared, so self-conscious of my fat little body. I know he's still out there, watching, waiting for his next move. I hope he knows he forgot to serve one kid. Lately, I've been taking long walks by myself, hoping to turn that corner and find waiting for me my redemption. That little bit of peace can only come from someone as beloved as the ice cream man.
Our final tale is entitled When You Wish Upon a Star. A young girl seeks solace in the comfort of wishing upon a star, only to discover that a dark presence is trying to harm her. This tale was written by Anna Smith and is read by Christina Schultz.
I've always suspected that there might be something wrong in my head, that I'm sick, twisted. I need to get this off my chest. I've never told anyone what I've experienced throughout my life, until now. Despite coming from a loving family, I craved attention as a child. I suppose it was only natural. My younger sisters were both born with special needs, and I felt somewhat neglected by my family. I'd often do disturbing things to catch the attention of my parents. Force myself to throw up, deliberately walking to the coffee table to bruise my skin, cry for no reason, lie through my goddamn teeth. Like I said, I'm twisted. It was obvious when I was a child. Anyway, these stupid acts always meant that my parents would immediately focus on me, so my actions were without purpose. After behaving like that, I'd felt like the center of the world again, like I was a necessary being, not just a decorative piece of flesh to pad out the family photo on the front of Christmas cards. As I got older, my parents began to wise up to my tricks and started to focus on my siblings again, leaving me to sit in front of one of my Disney VHSs with a bag of sweets to keep me satiated. My favorite was Pinocchio. Do you remember that old song from it? The one which tells you that your dreams will come true if you wish upon a star? My father got a new job when I was 8 years old, and we moved to the other side of England. I started a new school on a cold Monday in February, halfway through the school year. I didn't make friends easily. Children can be fickle, and although I was interesting to them for the first day, they soon grew bored of me and were irritated by how different I was to them. They started to ignore me too. I vividly remember walking home from school on the Thursday afternoon, kicking the puddles that formed along the pavement and muttering to myself about how I'd show them that I was interesting and worth their time. I tunelessly hummed the song from Pinocchio the whole way home, and decided, when I walked through the door and was immediately greeted by "Get out of the way, for God's sake!" to see if wishes really could come true. I wish more than anyone could possibly know that I hadn't. That night, after being kissed goodnight and tucked in by my frazzled folks, I crept out of my bed and towards my window. My eyes scoured the sky, searching for a star to wish on. I didn't want to pick the brightest. Everyone would be wishing on that one. It would be a waste of time. I settled for one that was almost out of sight, semi-tucked behind the roof of the house that our garden backed onto. It looked like any other star in the sky, but had a touch of pale red to it. I liked that. The star was looking to stand out, just like I was. I closed my eyes and began to murmur wishes. As impatient as I am now as an adult, I had a far shorter attention span back then. Why wasn't anything happening? Why weren't my wishes for love, attention, and devotion coming true immediately? Why were my parents still snuggled up together downstairs without me? I got angry. I cursed at the star, telling it there was no way it could ever make my dreams come true. It was a stupid, worthless star. No wonder everyone preferred to look at the bright, shiny one instead. I slammed the window shut, dragging the curtains back together, and stomped back to bed. I pulled the covers over my head to create my own little den in which to quietly seethe. Soon enough, I fell asleep. What I dreamt next would change my life forever. My dream started off normally enough. I got a lift to school because it was raining harder than I'd ever seen. My mother nearly ran a red light, unable to focus due to my sisters screaming in their car seats. I ran into my classroom from the car park. It was temporarily housed in a shabby mobile unit due to building work going on in the main body of the school. The windows leaked and the wind whistled through the gap under the door. I walked into the classroom and nobody lifted their head. My Wellington boots squelched dejectedly as I made my way across the sodden carpet to sit at my desk. The teacher came in and asked us to settle down and take out our pencil cases. I grabbed mine and felt a sharp stab in the palm of my hand. By the time I glanced down, the blood had already begun to drip onto the wet carpet beneath me. I yelped. The teacher told another girl in the class to walk me up to the nurse's office to clean my hand up and see whether I needed to go to hospital. We left the classroom and started walking. Along the way, we stopped into the ladies' bathroom as she wanted to use the facilities. Coming out of my cubicle, I looked down at my palm as I washed my hands. The blood mixed with water was the exact shade of pale red that the star had been. I smiled to myself, thinking of how childish I had been to think that wishing on a star would actually work, when a cool draft played across the nape of my neck. I looked up into the mirror. A woman stood behind me, head tilted down. Although her hair created a thin veil across her face, it was sparse enough to see her facial details. She had the most prominent cheekbones I'd ever seen, though perhaps they were exacerbated by the hollowness of her cheeks. Her skin, grey and listless, looked stretched over the bones of her face. It was flecked with age spots and small pale red bruises. A thin, twisted mouth hovered beneath her nose, quivering. I gasped and turned around. There was no one there. It must have been a trick of the light. Perhaps this cut was more serious than I'd first thought, and I had lost enough blood to make me hallucinate. I didn't really care if it was real or not. I needed to get out of here and away from this bathroom. I turned off the tap and foolishly glanced up at the mirror again. She was there, closer. Her head almost rested on my shoulders. I screamed and she opened her eyes. Her pupils were mere pinpricks in the center of a bloodshot eyeball. She smiled at me, hot breath spilling onto my shoulder. She had 3 rows of teeth, much like a shark, each blackened with decay. They were pointed and growing longer before my eyes. She tilted her head slowly and reached forward, through the mirror, and shoved my chest so hard that I fell backwards. My head slammed into the hand dryer and I woke up, knotted in my soaked bedsheets and heaving dry sobs. My parents burst into the room and held me until I drifted back into restless sleep. Now that alone would have been enough to terrify any 8-year-old child, but it was just the beginning. I woke up on my own. I heard my father singing and my mother laughing downstairs and smelled my favorite breakfast, pancakes. I quickly joined them, forgetting all about my horrible dream. I ate my pancakes staring out of the window. It was raining harder than I'd ever seen before. I put on my Wellington boots and rain jacket and bounced out of the front door, only to soak myself in a gigantic puddle. The rain dripped inside my boots and stuck my toes together. I liked the way it felt, clammy. My mother insisted on giving me a lift to school on her way to drop my sisters off at daycare. She ran a red light on the way and my skin prickled with a sense of déjà vu. Pushing it to the back of my mind, I ran to the classroom where I squelched my way to my seat. The teacher blustered into the classroom, shaking her umbrella out, and told us to take out our pencil cases. I took mine out as told and felt a piercing pain in the palm of my hand. My heart steadily began to beat faster as the blood dripped onto the sodden carpet before I could look down. I must have turned a shade of white because the teacher noticed and told a girl in my class to take me to the nurse's office. We walked slowly. The entire time I was telling myself that everything would be fine as long as we didn't stop off in the bathroom. She paused outside the bathroom door. "Please don't go in," I begged. "Why not? Are you scared to be out here on your own, big baby?" she taunted. "You were supposed to take me to the nurse's office, not stop off and kiss yourself in the mirror," I fumed. That did it. She glared at me and pushed me aside to get into the bathroom. I wish I'd gone in after her, but I couldn't. Every part of my body felt as though it was superglued to whatever it had been touching the moment she walked into that room. My feet glued to the floor, my tongue stuck to the roof of my mouth. Even my blood seemed stuck inside me. My palm had stopped dripping. A minute later, I heard a desperate scream. Not a typical high-pitched Hollywood girl in a horror movie scream, but a real throaty scream from a terrified 8-year-old girl. It hung in the air, thick with desperation. I found myself able to move and ran to get the nurse. The girl was found in a crumpled heap on the floor, her head bleeding from a hard impact with the hand dryer. The taps were on and the plug was in. There was water all over the floor. The nurse said she must have slipped on the water and fallen backwards. She'd fractured her skull and broken a hip. I knew better. I went to visit her in hospital while she was unconscious. I wanted to apologize, to shout at her for not listening to me, to cry and hug her. A myriad of emotions. In the end, I just sat at the edge of her bed, trying not to make eye contact with her sobbing mother. I hated myself. It should have been me. I walked myself home from the hospital, stomping in puddles as I had done that day before everything changed. I looked down into one, and I swear I saw an old woman giggling to herself before my foot splashed her into 1,000 pale red droplets. My dreams after I wished upon a star, when I was 8 years old, grew more and more disturbing. I'd often have flashbacks to the woman who appeared in the mirror. I don't remember the point when they started to spill out into my waking life. I'd brush my teeth before bed, and she'd appear behind me in the mirror, flashing her twisted smile, her gnarled hands reaching for me. I'd take a bath, and when I let the water flow down the plug hole afterwards, I'd hear faint, low laughter from the drain. Things started to appear physically too. Climbing out of the bath, I'd reach for my towel, and I find it coated in grey, stringy hair. Fingertips would scrabble from the plug hole when I'd let the water out from washing my face in the sink, reaching for me. My parents, of course, thought I was lying again to get attention. Any physical manifestations of the old woman would conveniently disappear the moment I ran for help. In the end, I learned to stop running to them, pale-faced and wide-eyed, after an encounter. No one would believe me after how much I'd cried wolf, and I couldn't blame them. She spilled out into every element of my life whenever I became lonely, wishing for someone to pay attention to me. Even though I knew how she would thrive on my desire for company and would become more powerful the more desolate and unwanted I felt, I began to consciously resent the time I spent alone. Of course, this increased her desire to toy with me. I'd walk near a television and it would crackle, turn to static. When washing the dishes, glasses would shatter in my hand, always piercing that same point on my palm. It began to make a pattern, although I would not realize this for a number of years. She would mess with the songs on the radio, crooning over the top of the latest pop song in a creaking sing-song voice. The worst incident, however, was after I was sent to my room for swearing at my mother. I'd failed a test for the first time at school and came home wanting attention. My mother was busy and tried to tell me to wait until she had finished doing whatever it was that she was doing. I snapped. "What's the fucking point?" My father led me by the arm to my bedroom in the attic of the house and told me to stay there and think of what I had done. He knew my tears were because I was being punished, but he had no idea how much. The attic of my childhood bedroom was a vast space with 2 crawl spaces on either side, which had doors leading out into my room. My parents used them for storage and kept the doors locked as some of the floorboards were missing. They became stiflingly hot during the summer and freezing in the winter. They had always scared me. My few friends and I were at the time obsessed with monsters and scary stories. When playing in my room after school, we would sometimes lock each other in there as a prank. We shared dark fantasies about the monsters living in there, creeping out in the dark of the night to devour us, and how we would slay them and become heroes. I think, looking back, that it is natural for a young child to be afraid of a dark, narrow space, especially when they daydream about monsters living in there. This fear is doubly justified when the child in question has something malevolent toying with them. After my father took me into my room, I sobbed until nightfall. I eventually crawled into my bed and pulled the sheets over my head, a habit I had brought with me from early childhood, whenever I was angry or upset. I felt invincible when no one could see me, when no one could read my facial expressions. It felt utterly private. I had made the transition from quietly seething and weeping to taking myself off into my dream monster world when I heard a scrape. I froze in my bed. Maybe it was just the wind creaking through the floorboards again. The room was silent for a few more minutes. I relaxed and my mind drifted once more. There was a deep scratching sound this time, coming from the storage space. I wasn't hearing things, this was happening. I heard a squeak, the sound of unoiled hinges moving. I knew the door to the storage space had opened. A slow, shuffling noise, much like the sound of a four-legged animal dragging itself across the floor, combined with a shuddering, rasping intake of air. To say that it made my heart jump into my mouth is a gross understatement. I thought that if I didn't move, didn't breathe, she wouldn't be able to find me. If only my heart wasn't throwing itself wildly against my ribcage. I felt light pressure on the bottom end of the bed as my quilt shifted. The game was up. She had found me. I felt the breeze flutter over my ankles a moment before I realized what was going on. Her hand took a sudden vice-like grip on my left ankle. I felt the same piercing pain I had felt in my palm the first day she appeared in my life, followed by the moist, thick trickle of blood down the sole of my foot. A metallic scent hung in the air. I screamed as hard as I could and lashed out, trying to kick her off of me, which made me fall off of my bed. I landed in a heap with my quilt cover wrapped around my face and torso, my legs still bare and thrashing. My father, to his credit, rushed into the room the moment he heard me thud to the floor. He stared, ashen-faced, as he took in the scene. He didn't say a word to me, but took me into the bathroom, where he showered the blood off of me from the wound on my ankle. I kept my eyes squeezed shut as tightly as I could, terrified of seeing her fingers groping towards me from the drain. I kept my mouth shut too. I didn't want to involve him with the horrible situation I had landed myself in. After bandaging me up, he carried me to my parents' room, where I lapsed into fitful sleep. I didn't move out of their bed for 3 weeks. I rang my father this evening to see if he could remember this incident. He spoke softly. "Jesus Christ, Anna, I didn't know you remembered that, but yes, that's pretty much how I found you. But you had your eyes clamped shut the entire time I was cleaning your ankle up. You didn't see what had cut you so badly." It took some pushing to get him to tell me the full details, but he did in the end. Geez, I don't know. I've tried ever since that night to convince myself that you'd rolled over onto that rock that you brought home from our trip to the beach, but I can't lie to you anymore. I never heard my father cry before. Now he was openly weeping, his voice shaking. "Shit, Anna, it looked like someone had bitten you." He'd found a brown, decaying tooth. What happened to my ankle played on my mind relentlessly for months after it happened. By this point, the wound had healed into a small, pale red scar. It would throb late at night when I was scared or when I felt alone. When I turned 13, I realized that the woman would appear to torment me whenever I craved love and attention, so I made it my mission to stop doing this. I filled my time reading books out loud to myself, acting out plays with myself, singing to myself, anything I could think of that would keep my mind busy and would show anyone watching me that I was perfectly fine on my own. I'd fall into bed most nights at around 2 a.m., exhausted, and sink into a deep, dreamless sleep almost immediately. Of course, there were times when I messed up, when I let myself think about how it might be nice to have a partner to act out a scene with, or someone to tell jokes to. Most people say that when they see a ghost or a spirit, the air turns cold. Whenever I slipped up and inadvertently admitted a wish for company, things were different. It's hard to explain the feeling. It felt like most of the air had been pushed out of the room, and the air that was left had expanded and was thickly viscous. It surrounded me, suffocatingly warm. I began to think that maybe the woman was taunting me, not just when I felt lonely, but because I gave her the ability to by feeling empty. This thought terrified me. I'd sneak into the kitchen and occupy myself by filling myself as full as I physically could. I'd eat slice after slice of bread smothered with jam, bunches of bananas, noodles, ready-cooked meats, anything I could get my hands on. By the end of a binge, I'd feel so full that there couldn't possibly be any empty space inside of me. Then panic would set in. What if she appears and I'm too full to run? What if I ate too much and she's angry? What if the few friends I'd managed to make at school didn't like me because I was getting fat? I'd have no company at lunchtime and might trigger a visit from the old woman who seemed to want nothing more than to hurt me. That would do it. I'd run as fast as my little legs could carry me into the bathroom and sick up all the food. I know, it's ironic. I told you that I used to throw up for attention. Now I was making myself ill to avoid it. All in all, though, I was doing quite well. Although I'd felt someone watching me, I'd not actually seen her since she crawled under my bed covers. I relaxed. I began to go to sleep earlier. I began dreaming again. She noticed. At first, it seemed inconsequential. I'd dream of falling over, twisting and skinning my knee, and I'd wake up and do it. In the mornings, I'd wake up and tell my mother to have a bandage ready, and by the afternoon, she'd be wrapping it around my kneecap, an incredulous look on her face. Things slowly, very slowly, began to increase in severity. It took a while to realize that if I shut her out of my waking life, she'd take control of my sleep. It went from skinning my knee to chipping my tooth, from chipping my tooth to slicing my elbow, from slicing my elbow to burning myself, despite the fact that I would purposely stay away from heat and flames when I had these sort of dreams. One day, I woke up after dreaming that I'd burned myself from my neck to my waist and decided to stay in my bedroom the entire day. I lay in bed, reading, until about 8 p.m. I felt the air rush out of the room as my eyelids all of a sudden dropped. I woke up fully clothed in the shower, the water so hot it scalded me. I screamed and jumped out, sliding as my foot skidded in a pile of stringy grey hair and what looked like dried blood. I ran into the kitchen and pressed myself into the ice of the freezer until the morning, mouth set and determined not to show weakness, despite the throbbing, scorched skin of my chest making me want to cry. She was controlling me through my dreams. As seems to be the pattern with my recollections, I'll explain my worst experience during this time period. I had been up half of the previous night, binging and throwing up food, so by the time I got into school, it was already halfway through the first class of the day. I wandered, dazed, into the classroom and headed to my seat when one of the girls I ate lunch with spoke up. "Ew, Anna, What's that smell? Have you not got any clean clothes? You fucking stink! I hadn't realized that I'd wiped my mouth with my sleeve after puking and had not changed my shirt. This wasn't an unusual outburst from the girl in question. She was undoubtedly the leader of our little group, and asserted her dominance by showing the other girls how horrible she could be to me and get away with it. "You can't sit with us today! What a shame!" she said with a bitchy smirk. I spent the morning at a 4-seater table on my own, bile slowly rising in my throat as I gave in to panic. Our school had a big playing field where the school's football and cricket matches would take place. Behind this field was a small forest, which led on to another field and then some houses. It was an easy shortcut for me to take to get home instead of walking the long way. As the lunch bell rang, I made up my mind to just go home for the day, so I headed towards the field. I couldn't control my thoughts. My mind was racing, and I was finally giving in to the panic of no one wanting to waste their time with me. As soon as I realized what I was doing, I felt the familiar roll of warm air expanding around me, pushing in on me. Whenever that happens, staying conscious feels like trying to keep my legs moving and my head above water in the middle of a storm in the ocean. I can't do it. I opened my mouth to scream and passed out. The next thing I knew, I was in a tree. I know it sounds comical, a scared little girl walking through a shortcut blacks out and finds herself up a tree, but it wasn't. Maybe if it had been a small tree, maybe if it had been a height that I could have climbed to, maybe if it had been the type of tree that had low branches that you could use to pull yourself up. This tree didn't. I was sat on a small platform with no ladder in a tree that I physically could not have climbed. I had no idea how I got there. Time had obviously passed, as the sky was a pale red. I didn't know whether it was sunset or sunrise, but I did know that I had to get out of here and get home. I was facing inwards, looking at the trunk of the tree and puzzling over my location. I regulated my breathing and was about to shift my weight to look for a way down when I heard something scuttling around the forest floor below. A rasping, wheezy intake of breath, and the sound of something heavy being dragged across the floor. Twigs popped and leaves crunched as my mind boggled and my eyes strained. I stayed as still as I possibly could, not daring to turn my head and look over the platform to see what was making the noise. A sudden sharp yelp of pain from the forest floor made me jump. The quiet, croaky snigger that I heard the moment the yelp stopped made the hair on the back of my arm stand on end. I was straining my ears to hear more when I heard tissue tearing and bones snapping. I couldn't help it. I let out a whimper. I held my breath and crushed my eyes shut. What felt like hours passed until I dared to let out my breath and open my eyes as I turned my head. I stared into those red pinpricks of pupils in a bloodshot eyeball. Her eyes were watering at the sight of me. She was crouched directly behind me on the platform, like an animal on her hind legs, slowly rocking her head from side to side. I had no idea how she'd got up there. Her rasping breath hit me in a wave of fetid stench as she opened her mouth into a grimace. She opened her mouth further and further until I was sure her jaw would dislocate. It didn't. It seemed to stretch. She let out a soft growl, which quickly grew in intensity and pitch until it was a deafening roar that made the platform I was sitting on quiver. Flecks of rancid spit hit my face, but I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move to wipe them off. She grabbed me by the joint of my right shoulder with that vice-like grip I had experienced a few years beforehand, and a white-hot pain coursed through my body as I screamed with pain. It was at that moment that I decided that I wasn't going to let her sink her teeth into me again. It took all my effort, but I managed to roll myself off of the platform. All I can remember is that split second of panic as your stomach drops when you know you've slipped and it's going to hurt. I knew pain would be a small price to pay to get away from her though. It all went black. When I came to, it was the middle of the night. I felt for broken bones with my left hand. I could tell without moving that my right shoulder was dislocated. I had a deep cut on the back of my head and the backs of my legs were bleeding. Satisfied that I was safe to move, I picked myself up and wandered home. My parents were nearly hysterical. The girl who had been mean to me had disappeared. They were worried I had too. My parents took me to the hospital, where I told the nurse that I thought I'd fallen when I was sleepwalking. She said, "Oh, that's nice, dear," and continued to read my chart. I don't trust nurses much anymore. I was quiet for the rest of the trip. We got back home, and my parents installed a small gate at the top of the stairs that led to my bedroom, so I couldn't hurt myself from sleepwalking again. My father looked at me as if willing me to tell him what had really happened. I didn't have the heart. I couldn't stand to see the look on his face if I told him that her mouth was open so wide I could see every single tooth in her mouth, except for one that was missing. They never found the girl.
In our first tale, we're welcomed to the town of Habitsville. It's an odd place. You could call it quirky. You could call it quaint. If you've had a bad experience there, you could even call it cursed. But in this tale, shared with us by author Samuel Singer, you could call it unsurprising. That is, until Sam discovers a new eatery that he's never seen before, despite living his whole life in Habitsville. I join Jesse Cornett and Wafia White in performing this tale. So let's go hang out in Habitsville. We'll check out the stores and grab something to eat. And don't worry about the ingredients. One thing I can promise you is that the Butternut Bakery does not serve human flesh.
It's good to be home. After the frankly insane events of the past month or so, there's nothing like settling back into the comfortable life of a small-town newspaper reporter. Except, of course, if that small town is Habitsville. We're prone to the strange here, through no fault of our own. Bizarre things just seem to happen, and just like clockwork, they're happening again. It came to me by word of mouth, but as far as I can tell, it started with a sign. I walked by the bakery myself just to be sure, and there it was, hanging in the window. It was small, white, and plain. The words on it stood out in an unnatural way. Like I should have missed the phrase when I was walking by, but instead found it commanded my absolute attention. The Butternut Bakery does not serve human flesh. An odd sort of laugh rose in my throat when I actually saw it, because up until that point I thought Heather had lost her mind. Heather is my primary co-worker at Habitsville Gazette. We're good friends, and often talk about everything from our pieces for the paper to what shows we're binging on Netflix. I know her pretty well, which is why it was strange when she suddenly said something extremely out of character mid-conversation. She'd been talking about her parents coming to visit from a few towns over and how cautious they always were when they came to Habitsville, as visitors often are. We were packing up our things for the day before we went home when she said,
"My parents should be here Thursday, which is way too soon. The apartment's a mess. And it's too small to fit all of us anyway. The Butternut Bakery does not serve human flesh. But how do you tell your parents they should get a hotel outside of town?"
I asked her what she meant. But as you might be able to guess, she had no idea what I was talking about. I even repeated the phrase back to her, but not a hint of recognition appeared in her eyes. I went home, and after a while, I forgot about it. But then I heard it again. Stepping outside of my house for work the following morning, I spotted my mailman, Phil, putting a few envelopes into my mailbox. I waved to him and said good morning, and like any polite person, he answered,
Good morning. The Butternut Bakery does not serve human flesh.
He held his smile, as though he hadn't said anything strange, and cheerfully moved to my neighbor's mailbox. I, however, was deeply confused. It felt like some sort of prank, though I had no idea who had orchestrated it and why. I heard it again later that day. In fact, I heard it 17 different times. Some people repeated it. Some only said it once. I even have a transcript from an interview I was supposed to be doing with an old woman who just turned 102, where there, right in the middle of a sentence about her great-grandkids, was the phrase, "The Butternut Bakery does not serve human flesh." I hadn't heard it when she said it, but it was there, typed out in my notes. So there I was, clocked out early on a Tuesday afternoon, just so I could stand in front of this bakery. I was bewildered, but not just because of the phrase, though that was bizarre on its own. I lived in Habitsville my entire life, and not once have I heard of a place called the Butternut Bakery. And yet, after an afternoon spent wandering the streets of my own hometown, I found a new shop right there in the middle of the main strip. It's a small building, but not so small that I would miss it. The building itself had an inviting burnt orange color, and the yellow lights inside made the entire place look warm and enticing. The smell of baked goods drifted out and over the pavement to where I stood on the other side of the street, fighting the overwhelming urge to go inside. Because there was the sign, wasn't there? The Butternut Bakery does not serve human flesh. It seemed like such an odd thing for a bakery to have to clarify. Maybe it was some sort of fun reference to Sweeney Todd. That's not exactly an appetizing allusion to make to potential customers, but there was something about the sign, something about the phrase. It was like the more that I heard it or read it, the less odd it seemed. The Butternut Bakery does not serve human flesh. Of course it doesn't. No bakeries do, or should. It's just good advertising to make the fact clear. I didn't see anyone walk in or out of the bakery for around 15 minutes, though plenty of people walked down the sidewalk. It was strange. Even the window shoppers that were strolling from display to display didn't bother to stop at the bakery. It was the late afternoon when someone might want to grab a snack or a late lunch. But no one gave it a second look. They didn't even seem to notice the smell, which was becoming more distracting by the second. My stomach began to growl as I caught another nostrilful. And then I saw someone emerge from the bakery. I had to squint, and it was hard to recognize him outside of his uniform, but I could still tell. It was Phil, my mailman. He stepped out of the bakery, holding a small bag, and immediately began to walk down the sidewalk. I crossed the street and approached, walking behind him.
Phil!
Oddly, he didn't respond. I thought perhaps he didn't hear me, so I walked faster until I was beside him.
Phil!
At the second call of his name, Phil stopped and turned to look at me. He smiled when he recognized me.
Oh, Mr. Singer. Funny running into you here.
Though his tone would suggest that we were having a normal run-in on the street, it was anything but the sort. There were markings drawn on his face as though he was about to have some sort of cosmetic surgery. There were long strips drawn down his cheeks and I could see the ink was peeking out from the circle that marked his ear. But as it turned out, that wasn't the oddest part of Phil's appearance. I had thought it was his bag that had been dripping, something dark trailing from the door of the bakery to where we stood now. But since we had stilled, the trickle only came faster and began to pool in a puddle around our feet. It wasn't hard to miss the source. Framed by the frayed edges of the shirt he wore, I could see that there was a large chunk of flesh missing from Phil's shoulder. Not like he had a bad wound that needed to be sewn up. There was nothing to sew. It was a scoop out of his body, and I could see the tip of his shoulder bones poking out where they had connected at the socket. I didn't know what to say. There was no trace of pain on his face. There was no signal that he even knew what he was walking around with. And oddly enough, no one on the street seemed to notice either. I had a brief rush of fear as I considered that perhaps I had lost my own sanity. Then, he said it.
I've just picked up a bit of a treat for myself. The Butternut Bakery does not serve human flesh. I've just finished my route for the day.
He unraveled the folded up opening to his bag and held it out to me.
Would you like to try?
I tore my eyes away from the gory wound on his torso and instead peered into his bag. In the bottom, as innocent as could be, was a medium-sized pastry. It was pocket-style, crimped on the edges, no doubt with some sort of filling inside. My stomach was turning violently now, and I just shook my head at Phil.
Suit yourself. This is the second time I've been in this week. It's terrible for my diet, but it's just so good. The Butternut Bakery does not serve human flesh. I'll see you tomorrow morning then.
With that, he turned and continued down the pavement, walking with a limp I had never known him to have before. I walked to the front of the bakery. Despite the warm glow coming from inside, the windows were not well suited for a display. The glass had some sort of coating on it, and although I could see the light shining through and dark shapes moving around inside, I couldn't make anything out. I was so focused on seeing inside that I didn't notice when someone had opened the door. The small bell at the top jingled, and I looked up. It was Heather. I lurched forwards and grabbed her by the hand. She flinched in shock and then half laughed.
Sam, God, you scared me. The Butternut Bakery does not serve human flesh. Are you going inside?
She motioned into the open doorway, and I looked inside. It's difficult to describe what I saw inside the Butternut Bakery, mostly because the inside seen with the naked eye was strangely similar to the view through the glass. There was this hazy film over everything, and only two certain sights could be gleaned: the bright yellow light and dark shadows moving around in the back. You shouldn't go in there, Heather. I know this sounds crazy, I know. I took a deep breath, then said, but I think the Butternut Bakery is serving human flesh. Or at least that's what I meant to say. I could hear the words as they came from my lips, though they were not the ones I had chosen at all. I said, but I think the Butternut Bakery does not serve human flesh. I stood there, horrified. Heather furrowed her brow at me, one foot still on the doorstep of the building.
Yeah, Sam, I know. You told me before. The Butternut Bakery does not serve human flesh. I think it's great.
I blinked. I told you before? The fear that was rising within me was quickly turning to panic. I had thought Heather had been the first one to say the phrase to me only a few days before, and never did I think I had said it back to her. Well, When you mentioned it a few days ago? Her frown deepened.
You've been talking about the bakery for over a month, Sam.
I have?
I mean, it's not much of a discussion. You pretty much say the same thing every time.
She leaned back out of the door and pointed to that sign that hung in the window.
The Butternut Bakery does not serve human flesh.
As I stood there, spiraling, Heather looked down at my hand, which was still clasped firmly on her wrist.
Now, if you excuse me, you're being weird, and I'm hungry.
This shook me from my daze. I couldn't let what had happened to Phil happen to Heather. I pulled hard on her wrist as she took another step towards the interior of the bakery. I tried to warn her, tried to say, I just saw my mailman come out of there with a huge piece of his body missing. Just missing, Heather. You can't go in there. I don't know what's going on, but it's dangerous. That's what I tried to say. But deep down, I knew what was going to come out. The Butternut Bakery does not serve human flesh. 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 I pulled Heather even harder, and she fought back with as much force as she could. The shadows in the back of the bakery were moving faster now, even buzzing around the edges, each vibrating violently with some unseen energy. The yellow glow of the lights burned brighter, so bright I had to squint. I thought of the blood trail I had seen drip from Phil's shoulder, the exposed bones and the ligaments peeking through the mangled skin, the butcher's lines drawn on his face, and I pulled with all my might. Heather lost her footing. We fell backwards, one on top of the other, hard on the pavement. The door she had pulled open slammed, as though sucked back like a vacuum. When it did, the bell at the top jingled violently, and the entire building jumped with the force of the closure. And it was that flinch, that slammed door, that made the sign fall from the window. I saw the words, "The Butternut Bakery does not serve human flesh," one last time, in plain black text on a white background. Then I blinked, and it was gone. Not just the fallen sign. The entire building was gone. People were walking by us now, as though they hadn't seen what had happened. Instead, they only gave us odd looks and stepped over our bodies. I sat up and looked around. The main street of Habitsville was just as I had always known it, before I first heard that phrase. The one I don't dare speak again.
Mel and Molly have always been together. Sisters, looking out for each other through whatever life throws at them. It's an unshakably tight-knit existence. But in this tale, shared with us by author Evan Dicken, the sisters discover a place that allows them to deal a little better with the world at large. Performing this tale are Kristen DiMercurio and Lindsay Russo. So let's join these siblings as they head to their special place, a place of power. But as we all know, power can be corrupted, even in the Grove.
Molly probably wouldn't have been so bad if not for the Grove. It wasn't like we set out to kill all those folks. Even not having parents to teach us, We knew the difference between right and wrong. Molly just never seemed to care. When we were little, she'd go out of her way to squash the worms that washed onto the road after a hard rain, smearing them all over the pavement. And every summer, she'd go out to collect June bugs in a mason jar, then screw the lid on tight so she could watch them die slow. Still, those were all little things. I don't think it would have gone any further if the grove hadn't made it so easy. It wasn't much to look at, just a ravine full of pine and maple, all overgrown with English ivy, sloping down from the edge of our backyard. The neighborhood had been all woods back in the day, clear-cut and subdivided into residential lots, missing trees memorialized by names like Poplar Avenue and Maplewood Court. Only the grove hung on, surrounded and spiteful. It looked normal from the outside, sure, but you really only had to step inside to know there was something wrong. It's hard to describe. One time in college, Molly and I drove down to West Virginia to catch a reading of one of my favorite authors. Coming from central Ohio, I'd never seen real mountains before. I remember driving up and down, feeling the pressure build inside my head as I changed elevation. Stepping into the grove was kind of like that. Like the trees were all pressing down on you, trying to crush you down into nothing. One time, Molly and I built a fort, spent all afternoon piling up logs, stitching branches together with braided twists of ivy. Excited to try out our new hideaway, we ran up the hill to throw together a picnic lunch. Couldn't have been more than 10 minutes. By the time we got back, the fort was gone. Not taken down, not wrecked, just gone. Like we'd never built it in the first place. I think that's when Molly realized there was something weird about the grove. Even so, we probably would have left it at that if it hadn't been for Felix. It was a class project. A white and brown speckled rabbit Mrs. Parkins had picked up over at the co-op. We fed him, cleaned his cage, all that stuff. And every weekend, one student would get to take Felix home. We were excited as hell when our turn came. Everything would have gone okay if he hadn't bitten Molly. I know what you're thinking, but it wasn't like that. One second, Molly is just holding Felix. The next, she's screaming, her hand all bloody. Then she just sorta threw him against the wall. It was pure reflex, no malice at all, but I guess it was hard enough to snap the rabbit's neck. What can I say? We panicked. Even having no parents to get on our case, we still had to worry about school. Molly had the idea of throwing Felix's body down in the ravine and telling everyone he'd slipped his cage and run off. It wouldn't be great, but it'd be better than saying we'd killed the poor thing. Come Monday, we trudged to class all muddy and downcast. Mrs. Parkins asked why we'd brought an empty cage to school. Nobody remembered. When I finally broke down and spilled the secret, everyone acted like I was making it up. It was like Felix had been squeezed right out of their heads. Mrs. Parkins even got mad at me for talking about blood and broken rabbits. I had to stay in at recess that day. Molly said it served me right for tattling. After that, I was all for counting our blessings. But Molly could never let things go. I think that's when she started killing animals. Dogs and cats mostly, but birds too, when she could catch them. I'll never know for sure how many, because she threw them in the grove and only told me about it way later. She could have probably kept on like that forever, no one the wiser. But like I said, Molly could never leave well enough alone. There was this neighbor kid, Dominic. He was 2 grades ahead of us, but liked to hang down by the playground and pick on the younger kids. Molly said he was mean on account of his dad hitting him, but they lived just down the street. I used to watch them all the time from my window, even though I wasn't supposed to. Dominic's dad was always out with him, playing baseball, throwing pitches, working in the yard. And I never saw him lose his temper, not even when Dom rode his bike through the flower beds. Some people are just mean, I guess. Once, Molly and I were playing army soldiers, and Dominic hid down by the trash bin so he could pelt us with rocks. One of them hit me right in the mouth and split my lip wide open. I wanted to tell a teacher, but Molly got this strange look, like when she was catching June bugs. I honestly thought we were just going to rough Dominic up a little. He was bigger than us, and a boy besides, but I figured if Molly and I could get the drop on him, we could get in some good licks. Anyway, we set up a little tripwire on the edge of the ravine, then went down the block to stick a penknife in Dominic's bike tires while he was pitching rocks at squirrels. We made sure he saw us do it, though, and he lit right out after us. Molly and I skipped over the wire, but it caught Dominic about shin height, and he went head over heels down into the ravine. He was pretty bloodied up on account of Molly having smashed a bunch of old Coke bottles down there, but nothing was broken. Well, not at first. Dominic started cussing and yelling about all the shit he was gonna do to us. We thought for sure he was coming up the hill, but then he just started screaming. Molly and I peeked over the edge, and Dominic was just sort of rolling around on the ground, thrashing in the dead leaves. That's when I saw the ivy had grown up all around him. Like strings on a fallen marionette, it threaded his arms, legs, and hands. Then the roots came bursting out from between his ribs, spreading, drawing him down into the rocky soil at the bottom of the ravine. That's when Molly told me what I'd always suspected. How the grove gathered things up and held them tight. I wanted to tell, I really did, but Molly said the police would come, and we'd go to jail forever and never get to see each other again. For weeks after, I was sure that every distant siren, every flash of red, was a cop coming to arrest me. But they never did. Even Dominic's parents went on like they'd never had a son, ignoring the room full of kids' stuff, the size 8 shoes, the stack of rotting Lunchables in their refrigerator. Molly helped herself to Dominic's bike and some other stuff so it wouldn't go to waste. One time, when Molly was away getting groceries, I went to talk to Dominic's parents. It wasn't guilt. Well, maybe a little. I knew better than to say we'd erased their son. I really just wanted to see if they remembered anything at all. They listened for a solid hour, never speaking, never interrupting, while I walked them through their own house, talking about Dominic and pointing to all the little bits of him that were left behind. The way they held hands, faces all screwed up as they listened, I thought for sure something was going to spark behind their eyes. But it never did. When I was done, Dominic's mom thanked me for the nice story and sent me home with a plate of lemon bars. That's all their son was to them now. A nice story. I thought we'd stop with Dominic, but the way Molly talked about all the good we were going to do sent tingles up the back of my neck. She said we were like Batman or Wonder Woman, getting rid of the bad guys. Still, it was years before we could make good. Mr. Framer flunked us both in sophomore algebra. That wasn't the reason we erased him, though. He'd always had this creepy vibe. And it was weird how the pretty girls always ended up with seats near the front of class. What really sealed it was when Molly said Claire Nussbaum told her Mr. Framer held Lisa Adkins after class one day. Claire said when Lisa came out she was crying, and said Mr. Framer had tried to feel up her leg. So, we figured we'd put together a little test. Mr. Framer had superhero posters all over the room. Iron Man, Hawkeye, the Hulk, all that macho bullshit. So, Molly went up to him after class one day and asked if he wanted to come over and see the new Thor movie. She said our parents would be out for the weekend, and we knew how much Framer liked the Marvel movies. We figured if Framer wasn't a creep, there was no way he'd come. I can still remember the way his bones cracked under tightening roots. He died staring at the moon through the branches, wide-eyed, his mouth hanging open like he was trying to scream. The sound that came out was like the slosh of wet mud under boots. Near as I can figure, it was the blood that got the tree's attention. I mean, Molly and I had skinned knees and elbows plenty of times down in the grove. But not like Dominic or Mr. Framer. Molly and I had made damn sure the bottom of the ravine was sharp enough to cut. Shattered glass, bent nails, flecks of flint and shale, all mingled with rusty springs and ragged bits of metal. The grove didn't disappear any of it. If anything, it seemed to welcome the junk, bristling like an old porcupine hidden among the brush. After Framer was gone, we took his keys and car, then sold his house. I thought for sure we'd be caught, but all we had to do was write our names on the deed. People would accept any lie, no matter how wild. You could almost see their minds working, like ocean waves piling sand into a hole on the beach. Everything just sorta filled in. I know what you're thinking, but it wasn't like that. We were heroes, you see. Molly would search online for targets, rapists, child molesters, murderers who got off on a technicality. We'd track them down, get them drunk or high, then bring them home for the Grove. Whether they were guilty or not, it was damning enough evidence they were willing to go home with 2 underage girls. We kept their stuff, sold their places, emptied their accounts. Some of it we kept, but most went to charity. That was my idea, by the way. After a while, we had enough to cover college. Law for Molly, creative writing for me. It wasn't that I dreamed of writing the great American novel or anything. I just liked the way stories came together. How characters could seem like real people even though they were just words on a page. In a way, it was kind of like the opposite of what Molly and I did. One time we erased this slumlord who was trying to evict a bunch of tenants so he could jack up the price and rent the houses to college kids. He fought harder than most, tearing up big fistfuls of ivy even as the roots coiled around his arms. I thought he might rip free, until Molly cracked his head open with a rock. Afterward, we signed the houses over to his tenants. They didn't realize anything had changed, but I bet they'd be grateful if they had. I probably should have paid more attention. But I had classes to worry about, and papers, and tests, and spring vacation in Cancun. Romance, too. Although, I never could seem to find anyone worth more than a few dates. Molly did all the research. She was my sister. I trusted her. Besides, she was getting ready for law school while I was writing my 4th C+ retelling of Paradise Lost. If Molly said some tech bro in a Saint Laurent fedora and $2,000 shoes had jacked drug prices and defrauded needy people out of millions, who was I to argue? I think it was when the police showed up at the house that I really started to wonder. We grabbed a guy, it was almost always a guy, Molly said had skipped on a hit-and-run conviction. Something to do with the police messing up the chain of custody or something. It was all by the numbers. Molly picked him up at a bar, then spiked his beer, while I pulled the car around. Who's going to bother 2 girls helping a drunk shitbag out of a bar? Even if they did, they'd forget all about it once the Grove was through with him. We'd be free and clear, unless someone called the cops right away. Well, this shitbag had a wife and kids. Apparently, this wasn't his first time stepping out, so she'd hired a detective to trail him and gather ammunition for the divorce. Anyway, the detective followed us home just in time to catch a big old eyeful of Molly smashing our date over the head with a tire iron. We'd barely gotten him into the Grove when the sirens started up. Molly ran up to the house to handle things, future lawyer, remember? While I rolled the shitbag down into the ravine. I could hear him crashing around down there, in the nails and broken glass. Then came the familiar slithery hiss of ivy wrapping around his legs. Cars squealed up outside, lights flashing. I heard our front door bang open, then Molly shouting something about warrants and unlawful searches. Down in the ravine, the roots were just starting to crackle. From experience, I knew it'd be another 30 seconds or so before the Grove had him all the way down. More if he struggled, and the shitbag was starting to struggle. Someone yelled at the police to check the woods behind the house. It was about 15 feet down into the ravine. I knew better than to go down while the trees were erasing someone, so I grabbed the heaviest rock I could lift and heaved it down into the pit. I was aiming for the shitbag's head, but the rock hit him in the shoulder. Fortunately, it was heavy enough to break bone, and I guess the shock finally quieted him down. One of the police screamed at me to turn around with my hands up. By the time I did, he had no goddamned idea why he was at my house. The thing is, neither did Molly. See, you gotta be down there to watch the trees erase someone. Otherwise, they're gone for you just like everyone else. I mean, Molly put it together pretty quick. The cops were a big giveaway, but she had no idea who we'd erased. After we'd sent the cops home with waves and cups of coffee, Molly started asking all sorts of questions. Mostly normal stuff like, did I know anything about the guy? Where did we find him? How did we pick him up? But then she started getting really personal, like, had I ever seen him before? I hadn't. Or if I'd been messing around on her computer. I had, but mostly to cruise fanfic sites. I didn't really know much, but the way she kept at it just didn't sit right with me. So I checked up on the shitbag. It wasn't hard. I had his wallet, his car, his address, pictures of his family, everything. More, I was the only one who could see all the broken pieces his impending messy divorce would have left behind. The guy was obviously a cheater, but there was no mention of a hit and run anywhere. I honestly couldn't figure out why Molly had wanted to erase him until I cracked his phone password and found pictures of the two of them together. Not gonna lie, that was tough. Not just because I'd trusted Molly, but because I'd convinced myself we were rewriting stuff for a good cause, that the world was better off without these horrible people in it. Granted, cheating on your wife and kids is pretty bad, but was it worth being edited out of existence? The worst part was realizing that if Molly had lied about one shitbag, she'd probably lied about plenty more. I'd never been as smart as my sister, but it didn't take a genius to start piecing things together. Like how I'd never had a long-term relationship, or even a serious friend, or how our house had always seemed bigger on the outside than on the inside, or how we'd never gotten an electric bill or made a mortgage payment. Molly and I had grown up all alone. 2 little girls going to school, buying groceries, just sort of skidding across the edges of realization. I couldn't believe no one had ever thought to check up on us. Turns out, we weren't heroes after all. Any other time, Molly would have figured me out in a second. But we were seniors, and she had finals, law school applications, an undergraduate thesis. A creative writing major might not carry the weight of a law degree, but it did mean I could turn in my papers early and spend the last week of the semester thinking about how I could make things right. We were celebrating out on the back porch. Steaks, Dom Perignon, and enough shrimp cocktail to choke a horse. Molly had aced her finals, of course, just gotten her acceptance letter from Moritz. She could have probably gone to Harvard or Columbia, but she wanted to stay close to home, of course. I waited until we were midway through the second bottle before I set my fork down and let my shoulders sag. When did you kill our parents? To her credit, Molly didn't even try to lie. She just looked at me, her eyes sadder than I'd ever seen them. Everything happened pretty quick after that. Molly threw her champagne in my face. While I was still sputtering, she snatched up the bottle and cracked me a good one on the side of the head. In the movies, the bottle always breaks, but this one didn't. So she was able to hit me a few more times before I could get my hands up. Everything went weird after that, like still frames lined up one after another. I felt the brick of the patio against my cheek, heard the scrape of the back gate. Molly's shadow stretched out across the grass as she grabbed my feet and started to drag me across the yard. I tried to kick free, but my legs felt all loose and fuzzy.
It didn't have to be this way.
Molly's eyes glinted silver in the porch light, her cheeks wet with actual tears. All these years, and I don't think I'd ever seen Molly cry. I clawed at the ground, pulling up hunks of wet grass, dirt under my fingernails. There was nothing to hang on to. Nothing before the grove. There was no breeze, but still I heard the trees creak, branches stretching like hungry hands, shivering in anticipation. It didn't matter that I'd fed it well over the years. The grove made no distinctions. Just before the edge, Molly's ankle rolled in the grass. She shook her head, blinking. Her grip slackened and I was able to tug my leg free. I gave her a kick just for good measure, and she stumbled on wobbly legs, swiping at me with arms gone feeble and awkward.
What did you do to me?
Molly went down on one knee, the heel of one hand pressed to her eye, as if to ward off a migraine. It didn't have to be this way. I slowly pushed to my feet, testing each leg before I put weight on it. I had plenty enough time. From experience, I knew the drugs I'd slipped into Molly's champagne would last for hours.
Wait.
Her voice was slurred, but there was a real panic in it now.
Where's sisters? Where's sisters, Mel?
But I was beyond listening. I made myself watch the grove murder her. Through tear-blurred eyes, I saw the vines thread her fingers, slipping almost tenderly between meat, sinew, and bone. For a moment, the roots lifted my sister up, like a child presenting a participation trophy. All the while, Molly held my gaze, not calling out, not struggling even as the trees began to draw her down into the cold, stony soil. I wanted to say I saw something approaching relief in her eyes, there at the end, but that would be a lie. Now I'm just waiting for the end of summer. The long, dry days when the grass turns brown and the leaves crackle like old paper. Then I'll tip a few cans of gasoline down into the ravine and try to turn the grove into a proper pyre. It's the least I can do for all the people we buried down there. Until then, it's just me. Well, me and this story. That's all Molly is now. I suppose that's all any of us are in the end. The folks we fed to the grove just got there quicker. It's actually kind of comforting to think of us all as just bumbling through life, thinking our story is the one that matters. June bugs bumping against the lid of a mason jar. Meanwhile, the world just shrugs and moves on, erasing us all in turn. You may have met the people Molly and I killed, passed them on the street, gone to class together. You may have even been close, may have even been family. But now, they're nothing more than words on a page. Soon enough, I will be too.
Well, let's try to erase those thoughts of the grove and groove into a short break from the horror. And speaking of erasing thoughts, I'm sure all of us are wishing we could rid our minds of some thoughts these days. There is so much negativity out there in the world. It's difficult not to see the glass half empty, and that can make us feel empty and burned out. We associate burnout with work, but that's not the only cause. Oppressive news doesn't help. And any of our roles in life can lead us to feeling burned out. That's why I like to recommend BetterHelp. BetterHelp's online therapy wants to remind you to prioritize yourself. Talking with someone can help you figure out what's causing stress in your life. The big problem I face with burnout is feeling like there's nothing I can do. I can't stop wars, fix the economy, save the planet, etc., etc. But I can work on myself and find ways to deal with those feelings of inadequacy. And you can do that work with the help of a therapist. BetterHelp is customized online therapy that offers video, phone, and even live chat sessions with your therapist. So you don't have to see anyone on camera if you don't want to. It's much more affordable than in-person therapy, and you can be matched with a therapist in under 48 hours. And hey, NoSleep listeners get 10% off their first month at betterhelp.com/nosleep. That's betterhelp.com/nosleep. So as we fight the stress and burnout, well, hey, let's return to the horror. It couldn't hurt to take a swing at it, right? In our final tale, we join John. John's been playing baseball since he was old enough to hold a bat. And in this tale, shared with us by author J.J. Smith, it's time for John to step up to the plate for the most important inning of his life. Performing this tale are Dan Zapula, Jessica McAvoy, Graham Rowett, and Jesse Cornett. So the bases are loaded. The world holds its breath for John to hit a home run. All he has to do is swing.
Babe Ruth is remembered as one of the greatest players of all time, despite striking out more often than he got on base. He actually held a record for strikeouts that would last for 30 years. This isn't why he's remembered, of course. If that were the case, then he would be little more than a mildly interesting footnote in baseball history, an otherwise forgettable bench warmer. Instead, we remember the Babe as the Sultan of SWAT, because when he did manage to connect wood with leather, you better believe that ball was going into the stands. One of the most memorable moments of the Babe's career took place in the third game of the 1932 World Series against the Cubs. During the game, both the players and the fans from the Chicago side were giving him a hard time. This was near the end of the Bambino's career, so many people considered him to be worn out and washed up. Just a has-been. At bat in the fifth inning, he was 2 strikes down. The Cubs dugout was really ribbing on Babe. They probably thought that if they could get under his skin that they could break his concentration. The odds were already in their favor that Babe would strike out. Even in his best days, that would be the safe bet. So why expect anything less from the has-been whose best days were behind him? That's when Babe pointed towards the stands. Now, it's debated exactly who or what he was pointing at. He might have been pointing at center field, the pitcher, or at the Cubs' dugout. But the most popular theory, what I believe, is that he was showing exactly where he was going to put that ball. 2 strikes down, a tie score, and the entire city of Chicago against him. It would have been easy for the Babe to give up. Instead, he swung. And wouldn't you know it, he sent that sucker flying over 440 feet into the stands, right in the direction he indicated. That was the most memorable single swing in baseball history. The Yankees would go on to win the game 7-5. I'm telling you all of this to understand why I have to do what I'm going to do. I'm never going to have the opportunity to become a has-been like the Babe. To be a has-been, first, you have to be. Me? I'm a never will be. But that's not going to stop me from taking my swing. I woke up this morning just after 4 a.m. Normally, I'll sleep in until at least 10 in the morning on the weekend. Even then, it took my mom yelling at me at least 3 times before I finally dragged myself out of bed. But with my big swing coming up this evening, my body was like a coiled spring. I didn't even need an alarm to wake up. 1 minute I was dead asleep, and the next I was so awake that I felt like I pounded an entire 6-pack of Mountain Dew. I jumped out of bed. Everything was already set out where I placed it the night before. First, I changed from my pajamas into my Yankees Little League uniform. Next, I collected my Louisville Slugger and my school backpack that I had stuffed with every ball I owned. With everything I needed for my plan, I sneaked out of my room. Never before had I felt more tuned in to the world around me than at that moment. Even my night vision seemed cranked up to 11. The hallway that normally looked nearly pitch black during so many nighttime bathroom trips now looked just a bit dim. For my plan to work, I needed to be quiet as a ninja. Sound was the enemy. Normally, I probably would have stepped on at least one of the loose hallway floorboards. But on that night, I tiptoed around each like I had psychic powers or something. As I neared the end of the hallway, I froze. I could see the soft glow of the television on in the living room. I recognized the audio from the home movie of my 8th birthday party 5 years ago. Under this, there was another, softer sound. I had to listen for a moment before I realized it was Mom crying. I turned the corner of the hallway toward the back door and away from the living room. Before I went to bed, I had made sure to leave the deadbolt unlocked. It makes a loud thunk when it was turned that I couldn't afford. My hope was that my dad hadn't discovered it and locked it after I went to bed. But luck continued to be in my favor, and I found it as I left it. Outside, the summer night air was comfortably warm. The cloudless sky over me showed more stars than I ever remembered seeing. It looked like glitter spread over a black velvet cloth. From the tall grass, insects sang their final lullaby to the world. It would have been the perfect night, if not for the distant sound of screaming. The boom of an explosion made me look around. I decided it was far enough away that I probably didn't have to worry about it. The sound came from the direction of the city, and my destination was in the woods. It was a 10-minute walk down the well-worn path, starting at my backyard to the clearing in the forest. Once there, I turned my backpack upside down, and the dozen or so old, weathered baseballs tumbled onto the wet grass. I snatched one up and put my bat on my shoulder. If I had one regret at that moment, it's that I didn't have anyone to pitch to me. I asked Aaron, but he said he wasn't allowed to leave his family's shelter. So, I threw the balls into the air and swung at them as they came down. It was pretty awkward to do it like that, so I didn't hit as much as I would have with a proper pitcher. Plus, my goal was height rather than distance. This is what's usually called a pop fly, and batters try to avoid it. So to do it on purpose was a bit of an adjustment. But I reminded myself that when my big swing came up, that I would have a much easier target. All I really needed to do was to swing and swing hard. Whenever I did manage a hit, I would have to run out into the field, find the ball, and bring it back to the pile beside the old hubcap that I used as home plate. I repeated this process for the remainder of the night, only finally stopping when the orange glow of morning peeked over the tops of the trees. Realizing that my family would be worried if I didn't get back, I gathered up all of my balls and took the path back home. I didn't bother stealthily walking in the back door. There was no need. With the sounds coming from the kitchen, I could tell everyone was already up. Walking in, I found Dad and my older brother Bill already sitting at the table. Mom was at the stove. The trembling cigarette in her hand made me feel sad. She had quit 2 years ago, and to see her just throw all that hard work away was a disappointment. Dad and Bill weren't setting any better of an example. Dad had a bottle of whiskey that he was pouring into his number one dad coffee mug. Bill had his feet up on the table as he took a hit off of a joint. It was never a secret that Bill smoked pot. We would smell it coming off of his clothes when he came home on Saturday nights. However, there was something of an unspoken agreement between him and our parents that he was never to bring it into the house. But everything was different now, wasn't it?
Where were you?
Mom's words were just below a shout. From the lines running down her cheeks, I could tell that she had been crying. I sat down at my usual spot at the table. The breakfast piled before me dwarfed Thanksgiving dinner, and on the stove, I saw that Mom still had all 4 burners going and an electric griddle on the side. There were stacks of pancakes, piles of sausage, bacon, sirloin steaks, eggs, and fruit. A bowl that we usually used for popcorn was filled past overflowing with hash browns. There were gallons of milk, OJ, and cans of soda of all kinds. Mom never let us drink soda for breakfast.
Just out hitting balls in the woods?
There was no reason for me to lie anymore. Mom sighed. She stubbed out her cigarette and picked up the pack on the counter to fetch a new one. But her hands shook so bad that she dropped the first and needed to grab another.
It's just... you need to stay inside. We all need to stay inside. You need to be with your family when...
What about my big game?
I didn't look up as I filled my plate with the in-home buffet. Up until that point, Bill had a leg propped up on the table. Another thing he would have never been allowed to do before everything changed. But now, he brought it down so hard that he stomped on the linoleum tile.
What the...
Bill tried to speak, but with his lungs full of smoke, it came out as a croak. He spent a good minute coughing and trying to catch his breath before he could finish his thought.
What the fuck is wrong with you? There is no game. There will never be another game. You know that, right? How many times do we have to tell you this?
When it happens, I need to swing.
Why? What difference does it make, huh?
Bill grabbed me by the front of my jersey. His right arm pulled back and tensed like he was getting ready to punch me. Dad leaned forward and put a hand on Bill's shoulder. He didn't say a word. He only grunted and shook his head, then went back to staring down at his mug full of alcohol. Bill shoved me away. He wrapped an arm over his eyes and started to sob. Dropping the spatula onto the floor, Mom rushed over to Bill and wrapped him in a hug. Dad didn't stand up from his seat, but reached over and placed a hand on Bill's back.
Please, John. Please just promise that you will be with us when it happens.
Mom looked at me with pleading eyes as she held my brother. After breakfast, we all gathered in the living room to watch Pixar movies. Mom made popcorn and offered us bowls of ice cream. Though, after the gigantic breakfast we had, no one did more than pick at the snacks. Near the end of the last movie, Dad stepped out of the living room for a few minutes. He returned with the orange box that the man from the government had dropped off. Mom became stiff as a piece of wood. She refused to acknowledge the box. Maybe she thought if she didn't look at it, that it and its awful contents would go away. Dad fumbled with opening it up. By this point, he was most of the way through his bottle. It was the first time that I'd ever seen him drunk. I've seen him tipsy, sure. 4 beers at a cookout, sure. But never before had I seen him stumbling as he walked or slurring his words. After he worked the box open, he pulled 4 orange tubes and lined them up on the coffee table, like they were soldiers with a grim mission. On the side of each was that kind of tiny text that you see on boxes of medication. But what was most obvious was the skull and crossbones inside of a triangle above that text. Mom turned off the TV after the credits.
I'll put on some music.
She walked over to the stereo like she was in a daze and looked through the rack. She popped in a CD, and light classical music came from the speakers.
I was hoping for some Slayer. But yeah, this'll do.
Bill made an empty sound that I think was a laugh, but it sounded more like air escaping the lungs of a corpse.
So, how do we want to do this? Should I do everyone? Or should everyone do themselves?
Despite slurring over his words, Dad's expression was stone sober. I stood up.
I don't want to. I already told you that I have a game today.
I turned to walk to my room to get my equipment when I felt a hand lock onto my forearm and yank me back. I turned to see Bill holding on to me.
Let me go, Bill!
I tried to pull away, but the 3 years in age and the 1.5 feet in height that he had on me made all the difference. Bill pulled me down into his lap and wrapped both arms around me in a bear hug.
I'll get John. You and Mom can decide what you're doing.
Dad nodded. After taking one last drink from his bottle of whiskey, he picked up one of the tubes. With shaking hands, it was placed on the side of his neck. His thumb depressed a button. It made a hissing sound, almost like when you open a can of soda, except quieter. Dad set the tube down and picked up the second. Mom was crying again, but she did her best to hold it in. She just kind of hitched, like she had the hiccups. Leaning forward, she brushed her hair away from her neck. Dad leaned in and kissed it. Then he placed the tube to her neck and pressed the button. While all of this was going on, Bill held me across the chest with one arm. With his free hand, he snatched up the 2 remaining tubes.
Chill out. Just chill out.
Bill's lips were right up against my ear.
Just wait.
The first tube he put into the side of his neck. Then, almost as an afterthought, he pressed the button and tossed it away.
No! Stop! I don't want this, Bill! Please!
I fought to get away. Bill threw me to the ground and climbed on top of me. I punched and thrashed. He barely took notice. It was like hitting a bag of sand. I tried to sit up, but Bill grabbed my neck and forced me back down hard enough that my head bounced off the carpet. He held up the orange tube in a way that made me think of a hero getting ready to stake a vampire in a horror movie. He swung it toward my neck. I'll never be able to thank Bill enough for what he did next. The end of the tube came down at my neck, but at the last second, diverted to the fleshy webbing between the finger and thumb of his hand, holding me down. When he pressed the button on the end, the syringe inside the tube delivered its dose into Bill rather than me. Bill leaned in, whispered to me again.
Just wait. Do it for Mom. After you can go. Knock it out of the park for me.
Bill fell off me and spoke out loud.
See? That wasn't so bad.
Sitting up, I saw that Dad was holding on to Mom on the couch.
Come over here with Mommy and Daddy.
Mom held her arms out to Bill and me. We both walked to her, but Bill stumbled part way.
Shit. Dizzy.
I don't feel anything yet.
Mom looked to Bill. Then Dad. Dad shrugged.
Maybe it affects some people faster than others.
I helped Bill to his feet and let him lean on me as we walked over to the couch. Mom pulled me onto her lap like she used to do when I was younger. I felt silly being 13 years old and sitting on my mom's lap. But it made her feel better, so I didn't complain. Bill snuggled in and rested his head on her shoulder.
Feel tired.
Bill slurred his words more than Dad, who had nearly an entire bottle of whiskey in him. Mom kissed Bill's forehead and held him.
Shh. Just close your eyes, baby.
We sat there clinging to one another in silence. Bill stopped breathing first. After that, Mom. And finally, Dad. I did my best to mimic the effects of the drug during the process to not give away Bill's ruse. I think I sat on Mom's lap for close to an hour. When I was sure that the awful process was over, I reached up a quivering hand and shook Dad's shoulder. The skin there was like touching a block of clay. When he didn't respond, I shook him again. This time, he just slumped over, his eyes staring at nothing. Sliding out from beneath the dead weight of Mom's embrace, I stood in front of my motionless family for maybe 10 minutes. I watched them. Never before have I had a panic attack, but from the basement of my stomach, an icy feeling of pain and despair clawed its way up. I knew if I allowed it to take over and gave in to that fear, that I would never leave this living room. I put both hands over my face and wept as quietly as I could. At that moment, I did consider staying there and being with them when it happened, just like Mom wanted. What happened next, I know, was just my imagination, but I could swear that I felt a large, calloused hand rest on my shoulder. The hand of a man who spent his life with his hands wrapped around a piece of maple. The hand of a man who, when everyone thought he was washed up, swung those hands anyway.
Swing, kid, swing, kid, swing.
A rough voice spoke in my head. I sucked in a sob and nodded. I might be and never will be, but I at least had to make the swing. Glancing down at my watch, I saw I might have just enough time to get to the ball field if I hauled ass. I ran to my bedroom, shoved the baseball bat into my backpack, and slung it over my shoulder. This time, I didn't bother bringing the balls. I didn't need them. I was going to swing at something much larger. I ran into the garage. On pure muscle memory, my hand slapped the button to open the automatic door. I jumped on my bicycle and threw my weight onto the foot pedal. After I tore out of my driveway, I didn't even bother to close the garage door behind me. It would have been pointless. I had no intention of ever returning. It had been nearly a month since I'd been anywhere other than my house or the woods behind it. The city I grew up in looked like the reports on the news from countries devastated by war. Houses were burned down. Cars were abandoned in the middle of the street. A house at the end of my block had dead bodies hanging from ropes beneath a maple tree. In front of this was a sign that read, "Looters will be shot." At one point, I passed a naked man on the street who had a burning Molotov in each hand. An insane smile crossed his face when we made eye contact. He threw one of the flaming bottles at me. I swerved around it as it exploded in the street, sending broken glass and burning gasoline everywhere. The heat from it was enough to singe the ends of my hair. I continued on without looking back. Going past a church, a preacher stood on the roof. It was difficult to hear what he was saying over the whine of feedback as he shouted into the microphone. The only words I could make out were, "The Day of Judgment." In the lawn, there were rows of motionless forms beneath clean white sheets. They were arranged as orderly as a military graveyard. I pushed on. I did my best not to become distracted by anything that wasn't directly between me and my goal. When I saw the sign for Beauregard Memorial Park, I turned hard enough that my bike threw up dirt and small stones as I skidded around the bend. My legs screamed at me from the effort of pumping them harder and longer than I ever had before. It didn't matter. I didn't need my legs, as long as I could swing a bat. First, I passed by the community pool, followed by the duck pond. Just past the pond was my goal, the diamond where I would take my swing. In the parking lot of the ball field, I squeezed the bike's brakes. But I was going too fast, and I squeezed too hard. The bike twisted out from under me. It stopped moving. I kept going. On reflex, I threw my hands out between myself and the pavement rushing up to greet me. It felt like I slid 100 feet, when really it wasn't more than 2 or 3. On a normal day, a spill like that probably would have had me running home crying. But things were different now. I picked pieces of jagged gravel and small glass bits out of my bleeding hands. My palms and right forearm were scraped to hell. Steady rivers of blood ran down my arms and fell onto the pavement in fat drops. It looked worse than it was. Nothing was broken anyway. Just a scrape, I told myself. I could still hold a bat. Tearing the backpack off, I retrieved my Louisville Slugger. Testing my grip on it resulted in a burning, tearing sensation. It was uncomfortable, but my grasp was firm. The dirty gray tape on the handle soaked up the blood and still gave a nice, tight grip. I walked out onto the field and into the batter's box. I've stood by this same plate going back to when I was first allowed to join a t-ball team. All of those times, the field was filled with cheering parents and jeering opponents. Now, the only thing I hear is the blowing of the wind and the distant muffled sound of a preacher shouting on a rooftop. They say when Babe Ruth pointed, that the stadium went quiet. Even his opponents shut up. I point now at my opponent. Not to the vacant pitcher's mound, the empty dugouts, or even the unoccupied center field. I point at the sky. It's a beautiful July summer day. Warm, but not humid. Not a cloud in the sky. You couldn't ask for a more perfect day for baseball. But in the clear blue sky, the bright sun now shares its space with a smaller and almost equally bright twin, the meteorite Thanatos. Though some people have called it wormwood or revelation, an astronomer discovered it 2 years ago. The governments did their best to hide it from the world as long as they could, but eventually, every amateur astronomer was able to spot the bright new star in the sky. It's over 3 times the size of the meteorite that killed the dinosaurs. The experts on the news estimated that it would kill 99.8% of all life on Earth. I remember when I first saw the 3D model of it on the news that I didn't feel as scared as I knew that I should be. My first thought was how the off-white and nearly spherical rock looked like a baseball. I had a lot of plans for my life. I was going to get on the high school varsity baseball team. Eventually, I'd catch the attention of scouts and get a free ride through college. Right out of college, I'd be picked up by the Yankees, then go to the World Series. I was going to be someone. But now, because of a damn space rock, I'm a never will be. So I'm standing here, at home plate. The light in the sky is getting bigger. I have a plan. I know it's stupid and impossible. My family thought I lost my mind, that I'm in denial. But I know what the outcome will be. I know there is nothing I can do to stop this. But there is one thing that I can do. I can swing.
This episode of the No Sleep podcast features just one tale, The Saga of Butcherface, written by A.J. Garlisi and read by David Cummings.
In 1997, my friend Chris moved across the state. At that time, we were 10. We didn't really have a way to see each other besides getting a ride from our parents to one or the other's house, which would be a hassle for our parents, so we eventually lost contact. During this time, I had only gotten the chance to visit his house once. It was a very plain split-level house, probably built in the early 80s, with neighbors close by, so it wasn't even secluded. We lost contact with each other for 10 years. That is until Chris contacted a mutual friend through MySpace. We made plans to hook up and hang out. Now that we had our own means of transportation, it was a lot easier. After maybe a month of this, Chris mentioned that his family would be remodeling the house, and I offered my help. He and his father gladly accepted the offer, since the previous owners apparently didn't keep up on it themselves. So, a couple weeks later, I drove down one weekend and we started tearing up carpeting, ripping off wallpaper, etc. The basement had been changed into a room for Chris some years before, and while half of the floor was concrete, the other half seemed to have been torn up and replaced with floorboards, and one of the boards had become warped and broken, leaving it protruding up from under the carpet, so they wanted to replace it. We tore up the carpet and started ripping out the floorboards when we found what looked like a hole dug about 5 feet into the ground under the floor. Chris jumped down there, thinking he could get better leverage to tear up the boards, when he said something was down there. His father got a flashlight and we jumped down to check it out. It turned out to be a very worn box. It looked similar to a shoebox, but it was about 3 feet long and extremely damaged by the elements. It was so tattered that you wouldn't be able to pick it up in one piece. We believed that whatever was in it would be just as damaged, but when we ripped it open, we noticed that whatever was in it had the added protection of a black trash bag. Chris picked up the trash bag, and its contents made the sound of plastic hitting plastic. We were curious as to what was in there, so we brought it upstairs and cut the bag open with a pair of scissors and found 24 unmarked videotapes. Chris and I were curious as to what was on them, but his father claimed that they were most likely somebody's old bootleg collection, and if we're still curious, we should check them out later, after we were done for the day. Since the plan was for me to stay the night and help them out the next day, then leave Sunday night, we decided to watch them that night. Since Chris's father was tired and didn't really care what was on the tapes, he went to bed a little bit early that night. We pulled their old VCR from their attic, hooked it up to the TV in Chris's room, and took one of the tapes out of the bag and slipped it in. The tapes certainly weren't bootlegged movies like Chris's father believed. They were the home movies of an unknown man we eventually began to call Butcherface. There was seemingly no flow from one scene to the next. It was like he would just film something random for what was usually just a couple of minutes, then put the camera away for God knows how long, until he found something else that interested him. Most of the footage was random footage, like him turning on the camera facing a chair. He would walk out from behind the camera to the chair, push it over onto the floor, walk back to the camera and turn it off. Or him playing with a random spider, which he would talk to in a low, childlike voice, then end the tape with him squashing it. Or him just filming down at his feet as he walks while deeply breathing. The one thing that always stuck out about all the footage is that on the few times that his face was shown, he was seen wearing what looked like a burlap sack tied tightly around his head with twine, with 2 eye holes cut out. He was also a big guy, being easily over 6 feet tall with a decent build, with some muscles, but not being buff. A lot of the footage was creepier and sinister. Some of the footage was of him videotaping people leaving buildings and houses. He was obviously hiding somewhere across the street from these locations, and he was often breathing loudly. Even worse were the things he videotaped himself doing. One piece of footage showed him sitting at a table with a rat trapped in an empty pickle jar. He unscrewed the pickle jar, took the rat out, slowly put his hand on its head and started twisting until it stopped screaming. He twisted a little more until its head was completely ripped off the body. Then he turned the camera off. Another clip showed him in a barn. There was no barn on Chris's property, so we don't know where this was filmed. He turned the camera on, showing a pig tied to a post. He walked over to the pig with an axe in his hand and hacked its head off. What was really creepy was that most of the footage was shot in what was now my friend's house. It was always dark in the footage, like this man didn't like to have the lights on. But we did recognize various locations of the house. One piece of footage was obviously shot in the living room, which showed Butcherface using a large hunting knife to cut the power cord of something we couldn't see, wrapping this cord tightly around his arm, grunting and moaning as he did it, and using the knife to cut deep cuts into his hand and arm. One disturbing clip showed him standing in front of a table in the kitchen. On the table was a clothes iron. He then unzipped his pants, took out his penis, put it on the table, and pressed the hot iron against it. He screamed, but didn't take it off for about 30 seconds. He finally took it off, limped over to the camera, and turned it off. What freaked us out the most was a clip of Butcherface in what used to be Chris's upstairs bedroom before he moved to the basement. He turned the camera on and showed the whole room covered in what appeared to be hundreds of lit candles. They were on every table, chair, and shelf. The walls were covered in paintings of grotesque and ghostly faces. He then walked to a corner of the room and started furiously carving something into the floor with the hunting knife. He would stab it into the floor and drag it around, pull it out, and stab it again. Since that room was vacant at the moment and used for storage and was going to be renovated anyway, Chris's father let us tear up the carpet in that area of the room. What we found was a section of the floor that had been heavily sanded down with no real evidence of what had been carved there. Another tape showed footage of Butcherface in that same room with even more candles. He was on his knees, facing away from the camera, with his arms in the air, screaming to be brought to the pits of pain and torture. One interesting thing about that clip is that he only had 3 fingers on his left hand, missing his pinky and ring finger. He had all 5 fingers in the previous clips, and we think he cut them off. That was the end of that one, and the camera appeared to run out of tape. The last piece of footage on the last tape showed Butcherface furiously digging the hole that we found in the basement. He was digging fast and breathing heavily. He was constantly grunting. His shirt was off, but he still had the mask on. After a couple minutes of him just digging, he started talking, saying something like, "This is it. This is it. They won't know. They'll never find me. This is where I'll hide." We were getting tired of having to lug the VCR up and down those steep attic steps because Chris's father, for some reason, kept asking us to put it back up there when we weren't using it. About 2 weeks after we found the Butcherface tapes, Chris's younger brother Evan, who was going to college for media production, came into the middle of a conversation about this and mentioned that he could convert the tapes to DVD using equipment at his college. After some haggling and way too much negotiating, Chris and I, having recently turned 21, would get the liquor for a party that friends of Evan's were having if he'd do the conversion the next day. When that day came, both Chris and I were waiting anxiously in the kitchen for Evan to get home. When he finally walked in the door, an hour later than he said he'd be back, he was looking extremely pale. We asked him if he was done converting, and he jumped in our faces saying that we never told him what was on the tapes. Apparently, he didn't actually hear what we were talking about and only heard that we wanted some tapes converted, and he thought they were more like old family recordings of Christmas or birthday videos. We calmed him down and asked him if he converted the tapes. He said no and quickly left the room. We were disappointed and started talking about what to do next when Evan came back into the room with his father behind him. After talking about what was on the tapes, Evan retrieved them from his car, and the 4 of us watched every one of the 24 tapes together. After the last tape was finished, the one with this is it, they won't know, they'll never find me, this is where I'll hide," Chris's father's face was just as pale as Evan's was earlier. He leaned back in his chair and said, "That was creepy." An hour of talking that night ended with us wanting to know who was on the tapes. I left for home soon after with the understanding that I would be kept in the loop on what we would do next, which was to figure out the previous owners of the house. A couple days later, I got a phone call from Chris saying that it took them a little while. They found nothing on the county website, but they found some history on the house at the town library on something called a reverse directory about a previous owner who had it in the mid-'80s. After a few unanswered phone calls, we decided to visit these people in person. So that Friday, me, Chris, and his father drove to their house and knocked on the door, only to be greeted by 2 80-something-year-old women. Chris's father told them that his family was living in their old house and asked if we could ask them some questions about it. They refused to let us in, but they did tell us about their old house. It turned out they were sisters. Their first names were Shirley and Louise. And Louise turned out to be the former owner of the house, but never lived in it. Apparently, she and her husband bought the house and were planning to add some new wiring and plumbing before moving in, but her husband had a severe stroke not too long after buying it, and eventually died. With the combination of hospital and funerary bills, Louise couldn't afford to fix it up and live there, so she moved in with her sister instead. But she did mention that during that time the house was known to be home to a fair number of homeless people who would be regularly chased off the property. We also asked if either of them had a son, and they both said no. We left there with not too many answers. A couple of weeks later, Chris and I went to the movies with his girlfriend. I think he was trying to get his mind off the tapes because I could tell that he was still creeped out. We were talking about how much the movie sucked when Chris slammed on the brakes. We practically skidded about 30 feet, and I was choked by my seatbelt, and his girlfriend, who wasn't wearing a seatbelt, was almost thrown into the front seat. We started screaming at him, asking him what the hell he was doing, when we looked at what he was staring at and saw a house. It looked familiar to me, but I couldn't put my finger on it. I looked back to Chris and he said, "That house is on the tapes." Then I remembered, one of the houses that Butcherface had watched people come and go from was right there, not 20 feet from us. We knocked on the door, but no one answered, so we decided to come back later. When we got back to Chris's house, I noticed the VCR hooked back up to Chris's TV in his room. I asked him about it, and he said he'd been watching the tapes again for any clues. No wonder he was still creeped out. That night, when I got home, I got a phone call from Chris. He was whispering and said that he thought he saw someone walking around his backyard. 2 days later, that Friday, I agreed to sleep over and see for myself. Chris was claiming to see glimpses of someone standing or walking around in his backyard, but it was always too dark to see any details on those previous nights. I was set up to sleep on a couch that was on the now reboarded up hole we first found the tapes in. Very little sleeping actually went on that night because we stayed up in the living room, staring out the sliding glass door to the backyard. We were talking about how we weren't even sure if Butcherface actually hurts people when Chris suddenly leans forward and points out the window and said, "See? Right there! Do you see that shadow or something?" I jumped up and flipped on the switch to the deck lights, but they didn't turn on. We got flashlights and went out to look. Besides some tree branches blowing in the wind, we found nothing. At around 4 a.m., we decided to get some sleep. I only stayed on the couch a couple of hours. I got too cold because I felt a draft that I think was coming up between the boards on the floor. I went home the next afternoon thinking the night before was a dud, until I got a frantic phone call that night. Someone had broken into Chris's house while they were out. The sliding glass door to the backyard was completely smashed, with broken glass having been thrown all the way across the living room and into the dining room. I drove back there because they wanted me as a witness to seeing a shadow in the backyard the night before. They showed me around and I saw that this person had completely tossed the living room, dining room, and kitchen. In the bathroom, the mirror over the medicine cabinet had been smashed and all the meds were missing. Something else was missing, which was a lot more disconcerting. 4 knives had been removed from the knife holder in the kitchen. I stayed there for about an hour and decided to go home, and it was only after I left that I realized that the Butcherface tapes were never mentioned to the cops. A little while after I got home, I got another call from Chris saying that they had found the missing knives under the blankets of each of the family members' beds. That weekend, Chris and his father decided to look around the house more thoroughly to see if Butcherface had left any other clues to his former presence in the house. I came over to help, and the only room they said they'd never thoroughly looked in since getting the house was the attic, so we decided to start there. It didn't take long to find anything because almost immediately I came across an old-looking trash bag in one of the corners. I picked it up and heard the tinkling sound of glass against glass. We brought it downstairs and cut it open and found it completely full of liquor bottles and used syringes. Using rubber gloves, we removed every object one at a time. It was almost all bottles and syringes and the occasional bit of trash until we got to the bottom. At the bottom of the bag, we found a shoebox. It was stained and worn, and we couldn't even see the brand of shoe that used to be in it. We carefully took it out and removed the top, which seemed to have been glued closed. Inside was a series of papers and photos. The photos were pretty disturbing. One was a close-up of a hand covered in pins, those ones with the long point with the tiny ball of colored plastic at one end. There were so many of them that it looked like a porcupine. Another one had a presumably dead dog lying on the ground. All we could really see of its surroundings was the dirt on the ground because it was too dark. We assumed it was dead because it was missing half its face. The flesh on the side of the face that was facing the camera was gone, making it look like it was smiling with a lidless eye. There were a lot more pictures, including a cow with blood on its mouth, a very pale-looking foot, various 70s and 80s era toys, a collection of knives, a hand and arm painted multiple colors like patchwork, and a close-up of an eyeball. The papers were pretty freaky as well. They were a combination of drawings and writings. Most of the writings were what seemed like a wish list of murder, listing practically every imaginable way how to kill people. Others seemed to be random thoughts, like how he accidentally pissed his pants while at the movies, or how he has an infectious evil and that he'll spread that to his disciples. Some of the drawings were pretty similar to the ones seen on some of the tapes on the walls in Chris's old room. Others were more detailed and showed corpses in various states of decay and of strange creatures. They were humanoid, but they all had a demonic look to them, with many of them shown standing on all fours. One thing that showed up often was a strange symbol. It looked like the letter C with the gap in the C pointing down, with a V laid on top of it. When we got to the bottom of the box, we found another tape, one that we'll never get to watch because it was completely coated in candle wax. Running out of clues, we decided to revisit the old women who owned the house in the 80s. It had been almost 2 months since we last visited them, and we came to realize that their story didn't quite make sense. For instance, Louise claimed to have given up on the house, yet on the tapes we could see that the house had power. Why would she have continued paying the power bill if she didn't want the house? They also mentioned that homeless people had been regularly arrested or chased off the property by the cops, but we found no record of this. We tried calling them, but just like last time, we got no answer, so we decided to drop by again. When we got there, we found the house abandoned. We went next door and asked the neighbor if they knew where the 2 old ladies that lived next door had gone. They told us that Louise had died about 3 weeks earlier, but they didn't know how, and Shirley abruptly packed up and moved away a week later. While Chris's father was talking to the neighbor, Chris pulled me aside and whispered, "We're breaking into that house." That same night, we waited until it was late and drove to the old lady's former house. We had never broken into a house before in our lives, and we were dressed in the stereotypical burglar outfit, black shirt and pants, and a black mask. When we got to the house, we were so nervous that we didn't even leave the car for a good 45 minutes. When we felt assured that the neighborhood was asleep, we got out of the car and crept into the backyard and up to the back door. We looked in the window of the door, but it was too dark to see anything. I took my shirt off and put it up against the window and gave it a punch, breaking the glass. It felt surprisingly loud, but that could have been because it was so quiet, and the neighbors never woke up, so I guess it really wasn't that loud. I reached in through the hole in the glass and unlatched the door. Then we had a whispered fight over who will go in first. It actually came down to a game of rock, paper, scissors, which I won, so Chris went in first. We crept in, hunched over, and I closed the door behind me, accidentally slamming it, giving Chris a good jump that we couldn't help laughing over. We snuck around the house with our flashlights shining over the walls. As a side note, I really don't see how much they would have fixed up Chris's house when they had it, because this one looked like crap. The wallpaper was probably older than me and Chris combined. Anyway, we went into the living room and found a huge pile of trash lying in the far corner with a depression in the middle, like a person or a large dog had used it as a bed. We went upstairs and found something that connected this house to Chris's. In one of the bedrooms was a pile of pill bottles. Some of the pill bottles were the ones stolen from Chris's bathroom medicine cabinet. We knew this because some of them had his mother and father's name on them, and one of them was Chris's back pain medicine. That was all we needed to see, so we booked it back down the stairs and ran to the door. But when we got to the door, I jumped back, knocking both me and Chris down. On the inside of the back door was the CV symbol from Butcherface's notes. After we got back to the car, Chris said something that creeped both of us out. If Butcherface really is living in that house, he probably wasn't there because he was staking out Chris's house right now. Later that week, I visited Chris's house again, and as soon as I walked into the door, I knew I walked into an air of distress. Chris's mother and brother were pacing back and forth in the living room, looking out the window into the backyard. I walked in and asked what was going on, and looked out the window and saw Chris and his father in the backyard screaming at each other, and behind them was a large bonfire that was almost nothing more than cinders. Chris's mother said their dog Brackett had gone missing but didn't say anything else. I opened the newly repaired sliding glass door and walked out to meet them. As soon as Chris's father saw me, he became even angrier. Chris met me halfway to the fire and said, I had to tell them that we broke into that house. I asked why, and he said that he thinks that Butcherface took their dog as payback for breaking into his home. I asked about the fire, and Chris told me that what his father was burning was Butcherface's notes, photos, and tapes. Everything had been burned to ashes. During this time, his father had walked up behind him and said, I'm gonna end this right now. I'm burning everything so that you guys can't get into any more trouble. As he said this, he continued past us and into the back door of his garage and came back with a shovel, adding, and I'm burying the ashes to put this to rest for good, and started digging a hole in the back of his yard close to the woods. Chris pulled me back into the house, into the basement, and started talking about how all of this was unfair. How could his father just burn tapes like that? They were so close to figuring out who Butcherface was, etc. Then his mother called for us from upstairs. We came up and she pointed out the door to his father, who had stopped digging and was looking into the hole he had just dug. We walked outside and crossed the yard to the hole that his father was still looking into. When we got to it, we realized why he was frozen there, because just a couple feet into the hole was what turned out to be over 30 skeletons of cats, dogs, and other animals. This is when we started calling him Butcherface. After Chris's father burned Butcherface's media, including the art and photos and tapes, I think everyone, including me, hoped that Chris would let it go. I know I was willing to let it go, but it wasn't long after that Chris began looking for any evidence of other media by Butcherface. He would occasionally talk, just to me, about strange tapes and art found in other parts of the country, but most of it seemed sketchy, which even Chris was completely willing to admit. My attitude began to change about looking into Butcherface around this time, when I was sitting at my desk and caught myself absent-mindedly drawing Butcherface's CV symbol on a piece of paper. Roughly 2 weeks after Chris's dog disappeared and his father burned all evidence of Butcherface, Chris showed up on my doorstep saying he wanted to go back to the house we found that was on the tapes. When we first found it, no one was home. We showed up at the house around 6 p.m. on a Wednesday, hoping that anybody living there would be home from work. We went to the door and knocked. The person who answered the door was a man in his 50s. It turned out that he actually did live in the house in the mid-80s when we believed the tapes were shot. We told him about the tapes and how his house was on them, and asked if anything strange had happened around that time. He said that they didn't notice anything like what was on the tapes, but there was a point when they realized that someone had been living in their shed in the backyard. The shed had since been torn down, but he did remember that there was a carving left on the door frame. We asked him what it was, and he pulled out a pad of paper and drew the CV symbol. The very next day, Chris's mother was walking around in their backyard and came across their dog. He had been ripped open from the neck to the stomach and placed in the still open hole his father had dug 2 weeks earlier. The cops had been called and they were finally told about Butcherface. Since Chris's father had burned everything, they really had no evidence that the dog had been killed by a person and labeled it an animal mauling. It wasn't long after that I came home to find my front door open. I walked up the front steps and saw that the door was swung open, only hanging on one hinge. It being dark out, I flipped the light switch just inside the door and it didn't come on. I went around the house to the shed in the backyard and grabbed the most menacing thing I could that was near the door, which was a pitchfork. Going back to the front door, I pulled out my cell phone and called 911. After making the call, I cautiously entered the house, making sure the pitchfork was in front of me. I crept up the stairs and got to the nearest light switch and flipped it, but this one wasn't working either. I came to the conclusion that the power was cut. Using my cell phone as a flashlight, I got a look at the damage done. The leather couch had been slashed open with many cuts and the padding pulled out, and the glass doors of the kitchen cabinets had been smashed. More than half the liquor bottles in the liquor cabinet were missing, and the medicine in the bathroom cabinet was gone. It all seemed very familiar. I mean, even my 13-year-old dog's arthritis pills were taken. My dog Drake has an anxiety problem, so we keep him in a crate whenever we leave the house. Thinking of what happened to Chris's dog, I ran down the hall to the office where the crate is kept. I shined what little light I had from my phone on the crate and saw its door open, and it looked empty. I stepped forward, afraid at what I'd see, and shone the light into the crate and saw Drake cowering in the back, whimpering. That's when the cops pulled up. My family came home soon afterwards. When the cops asked us if we had any enemies, since the house mostly just seemed to be tossed, I had to tell them about Butcherface. While the cops were looking around, they noticed that the power hadn't been cut. It turned out that every single light bulb in the whole house had been partially unscrewed, leaving the light bulb in the socket but not able to light up. This was the first time my family had heard about Butcherface, and they asked me to stop seeing Chris. I hadn't so much as talked to Chris on the phone for almost 2 months after that. Very little had happened in that time, but something still didn't feel right. For one thing, my sister, who worked nights, started asking me to stand at the front door and wait until she got into her car whenever she left, since she leaves after dark. I asked a couple of times why, but she never gave an answer. It's like she just felt creeped out or that she was being watched whenever she went outside. Our dog still seemed to be spooked too. Whenever we tie him outside, he'd only do his business and come right back in, which is very out of character for him. One day I was standing at my back door looking into the backyard, thinking of all of this, when my eyes locked onto the shed in my backyard, and I remembered the story told to us by the people we talked to, whose house we saw on the tapes. They found evidence of someone living in their shed. I went to my room and picked up a sword from my nerdy sword collection and went out to the shed. I crossed the yard, and when I got to the shed, I found it unlocked. I opened the door and looked inside, only using the sunlight since there's no power running to it. I immediately saw a pile of trash in the far corner. It was a loose pile of tarps, cloth from umbrellas, and trash bags that had a compression in the middle like someone had been lying in it. Off to the side of the pile was the missing liquor bottles from inside the house and some garbage. This guy had been living in the shed, and there was a good chance he had been there since the house was broken into 2 months ago. In fact, for all I know, he could have been in there that night when I went to the shed for the pitchfork, watching me. I didn't want to freak out my family, so I cleaned it up in secret. At the bottom of the bedding of trash, I found a ratty notebook. I only half opened it to a random page, saw some very familiar artwork, and immediately closed it, tore it up, and threw it in the trash. A couple weeks later, I got a phone call from Chris. He said he was still doing some looking around and found some strange stuff. Before I could say that I didn't want to hear it, he said he went back to the house of the women who were the former owners of the house who we had talked to before. Before I could respond to this, he said, "They lied. Come see me tomorrow." The next day, without telling my family, I drove back to Chris's house. When I got there, I was greeted by his mother, who seemed to be in a good mood. I asked her how it was going, and knowing what I was talking about, she said nothing strange had happened there for a couple months. I asked where Chris was, and she pointed to the stairs that led down to his basement bedroom. I opened the door and immediately heard Chris talking, but I couldn't quite hear what he was saying, but assumed that he was talking to his girlfriend. When I got to a point on the stairs that I could see into his room, I saw that he was sitting in front of his desk, talking to a video camera. I asked him what the hell he was doing, and he smiled and said nothing, and turned off the camera and slid it back between his monitor and computer tower, like it wasn't strange that he was talking to a camera, just like Butcherface did. By this time, I had gotten to the bottom of the stairs, and Chris stood from his chair and immediately changed the subject. He walked up to me and started talking about how, a couple of days before, he drove to the house of the old women who used to own his house. When he got there, he parked across the street and waited. He knew that the former owner of the house, Louise, had died, and that her sister Shirley moved away soon after, and that someone had been living in her house since then. He was hoping to see Butcherface either entering or leaving the house. Instead, he saw Shirley pull into the driveway. They got out of their cars at the same time. Shirley apparently didn't see Chris because she just continued to the house. By the time he caught up to her, she had already gone into the house, but she then began to back out, apparently shocked at something she saw in there. When he got to her, she was already back on the porch. He started talking to her, and she finally told him what she really knew about Butcherface. Like we already knew, she started with when her sister Louise and her husband bought the house. They wanted to replace the wiring and plumbing, but before that could happen, Louise's husband had the stroke and eventually died. This is where the story left off before. What they didn't tell us is that a couple years after her husband's death, Louise still couldn't afford paying for it, so she decided to sell it instead. After it just sitting there for not too long, they thought it would be relatively easy to fix up, so they, in their early 60s at the time, decided to do it themselves. When they arrived to check out the house for the first time, they found the house like it looks in the videos, with garbage everywhere and drawings on the wall with burnt-out candles everywhere and a hole in the basement. They began to clean it up, picking up the garbage, putting up cheap wallpaper, putting down carpeting, and boarding up the hole in the basement as best they could. One thing she did mention that we never noticed is that in the basement there was another hole in the cinder block wall in the foundation that led into the backyard. They bricked up the hole, but due to their budget and old age, they never used any mortar. They just laid the bricks in place and left it at that. Chris asked her if they put the videos in the hole, and she outright refused to answer. We determined that if anybody knew where that hole in the wall was, they could just remove the cinder blocks and get into the hole and do whatever they wanted there, like hiding some tapes. We went out to his backyard to see if this was true, and we did indeed find a patch of the cinder block wall where you could remove the blocks. They seemed to have fresh scrape marks, like they had been recently moved, but we couldn't be sure. Chris resumed his story and told of how he and Shirley continued their conversation, with her telling him that while cleaning out the kitchen, they found a rectangular object wrapped in tinfoil. They unwrapped it and found a videotape. They brought it back home and popped it in their VCR and watched it. Apparently, there was no picture. The screen was just black, like the lens cap had been left on or something. But it seemed to be intentional because what the video lacked in visuals, it compensated for with sound. He said she described it as rants and strange noises for the entire tape. He said she then ended their conversation and quickly walked back to her car, left her house's door open, and drove away.
Chris then abruptly changed the subject by jumping back to his desk and pulling a folder out of a drawer and opening it up. The papers inside were printouts of various disconnected websites showing pictures of stills from videotapes, drawings, photos, and carvings that all looked familiar. He said, "Look, they're from all over the country, including some places in Mexico and Canada. Some of these apparently even appear in some places in Europe. It's like he's traveling around and leaving the stuff wherever he can." Chris then said that he will continue his investigation into Butcherface. That investigation continued for 4 years, until last weekend. I hate to make this sound cliched, but Chris became pretty obsessed with trying to find out who Butcherface was. His investigation was slow, finding the occasional picture or video. He even traveled to a town near Denver, Colorado, because he believed he found what he called a nest, a place where Butcherface seemed to appear often, much like around our area. But he didn't find much. We were never really sure what was fueling Chris's interest in Butcherface because he had no more of Butcherface's media since his father burned it all. Then, last week, we found out where it was all coming from. I had come by because we were planning to see a movie, but we never got to go. I pulled into his driveway at the same time as his girlfriend. We both got out of our cars and laughed at the coincidence of both of us getting there at the same time and walked into his house. His family was working, so we just walked into the house and down the stairs to his room. We hung out for a little while, Chris and his girlfriend sitting on his bed with me sitting at the desk. We were just chit-chatting and I was spinning the chair I was in when I happened to notice a tape leaning against the speaker to his computer. I picked up the tape and asked him what it was. He immediately got an "oh shit" look on his face. When his girlfriend got into the questioning, he finally broke down and admitted that it was the tape the old ladies had found in the house in the 80s. He said that when he talked to Shirley that time in front of her house and she told him they found the tape, she also gave the tape to him, and he chose to leave that part out of the story 4 years ago. This is when we knew he had a problem. We asked him to stop listening to the tape. We asked him to stop this search for Butcherface because it had never led to anything good. The next week, we decided to go to a cabin that Chris's girlfriend's family owns on a lake a couple towns over to finally finish this. We didn't know how right we were. We arrived at the cabin Monday afternoon. It was me, Chris, his girlfriend, and our friend Jesse. We filled Jesse in on the whole Butcherface story on the drive down, and he immediately regretted coming along. Chris brought everything he had on Butcherface, and soon after we got there, he asked if we could watch the last tape one final time. Jesse wanted to see what all the fuss was about, and I must admit I was curious to check it out myself. The cabin had no cable, phone line, cell phone signal, or internet access. The only form of entertainment was to watch movies, so they actually had a VCR still there with a decent VHS collection. We popped the tape into the VCR and turned it on. As mentioned before, this tape had nothing visual and was all audio. It began with clicking sounds like from an insect that would start off slow and go faster, then slow down and go fast again. It then changed to a quiet talking, like a whisper. The voice talked about how he had an infectious evil and wanted to spread it to his disciples, and then it just faded out like he simply walked away from the camera. There were more noises of what sounded like animals walking around inside a building, and a high screeching noise that lasted for a good 5 minutes. There was more talking where he called people zombies and cows, and how only a few were worthy for the pit, followed by a jabbering sound like he was humming while wiggling his tongue around. That night, we lit a bonfire, and Chris burned every note, picture, schematic, and the last tape he had about Butcherface. The next day, we spent most of the morning watching movies, regular movies, and then we went out on a rowboat and explored the lake for a couple of hours. We got back and we hung out on the shore with some drinks. I must admit it reminded me of that time I walked into Chris's house and met his mother. She was in such a good mood after not having any problems with Butcherface anymore. It felt almost exactly like that. At one point, Chris's girlfriend came out and asked if any of us knew where her iPod Touch was. She claimed that she left it in its docking bay, one of those ones with the speakers, which was also missing. She kept accusing us of hiding it from her. At this point, it was starting to get dark, and we began going back into the cabin one by one. I was the last one in, and I must admit I didn't close the door. Chris and his girlfriend and I were in their room looking for the iPod and its docking station when Jesse, who was still out in the living room, yelled, "Holy fuck!" We ran out into the living room and he said that he just saw a person run by the open door outside on all fours. Chris's girlfriend rushed to the door and slammed it shut and locked it. We stood still listening for where this person could have gone when all of a sudden we started hearing loud noises coming from the front deck. It was random noises like a voice chattering, something like the grinding of a buzzsaw, sobbing, all in quick succession. We rushed to the door and peeked out the small window and saw Chris's girlfriend's iPod sitting on its docking bay, with a power cord going from it to a plug on the outside wall, sitting on the railing of the deck. These sounds were coming from the iPod. Chris opened the door, ran out and grabbed the iPod off the docking bay and ran back into the cabin. He gave it to his girlfriend and told her to delete the file that was playing, effectively erasing every known piece of media we knew of by Butcherface. Chris and I then ran to the door, opened it, and yelled that there was nothing left of any of his media we had. We destroyed every connection we had to him, and he had no reason to follow us anymore. It stayed quiet for the rest of the night, and we left that morning. During the drive home, we started thinking of some things. We now believe that Butcherface wanted us to find those tapes. Maybe not us per se, but someone. The day that we found those first 24 tapes, we started an avalanche of more and more of his media and possibly assisted in its spreading to others. He had mentioned more than once in his media that he wanted to spread his infectious evil only to his disciples. And we think those disciples are those that have seen his media. We say this because he never seems to attempt to hide it, and he seems to keep watch of all those who have seen it. In the notes I saw of Chris's before he burned them, I saw that many of the sightings of him were scary but never seemed to be completely dangerous. It was like he was just keeping watch over those who had experienced his media. Ultimately, I decided to write this to warn you that if you ever come across anything that even resembles the footage, audio, art, writings, or carvings that are described in these stories, do not look at them. When we got back home, Chris decided to tell his family everything that had happened, including the tape he had hidden from everyone else and our hypothesis as to who Butcherface is and what he's doing. Chris's brother Evan's face became pale, just as pale as the day he first saw the tapes. We asked him what the matter was, and he said, "You know how I said I never converted the tapes to DVDs? Well, I lied." Apparently, he actually did do the conversion at his college, after the day their house was broken into. The thing is that they disappeared, and he later learned that fellow students had taken them, thinking it was a cool school project, and made copies. From what we've heard, they've been handed down from person to person and copied, leading to countless duplicates.